Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Excess Exceed, the show where Gearface traps an expert against their will to teach him an Exceed character. I'm back today with D to talk to me about this little weirdo Tinker Knight, and I'm very, very excited about it. Hi, D.
Hi, I can confirm that I'm D, and this is Little Weirdo, and you should be very excited.
Yep. I'm excited both about the D part and about the Tinker Knight part for clarity. So quick disclaimer before we get started, as always, kind of two nested disclaimers. Number one is that we're going to be talking about playing to win on this show. And there's a lot of other ways to play Exceed, especially with this guy. I get the sense that if you want to play for fun and do some fun lines and just kind of go for memes, he can be a lot of fun. And if the line that we describe is not fun to you or not interesting to you, please play the line that you do find interesting. Not only will you have more fun doing it, but it'll also keep you playing Exceed longer, and that means that overall you're probably going to end up improving faster. Part two of the disclaimer is that we're going to be talking a lot about strategy in kind of absolute terms on this show. You're going to hear us say things like always do this, never do that. I think D just dropped from the room. Please forgive any issues that we're having with D's internet
I'll be
tonight. I'm
back.
not sure if we'll get it back. But any strategic advice that we give during this lesson is D's opinion and D's rules for his strategy. That said, D's opinion is very informed. So if you do think that we've misrepresented a line or undervalued a line, please let us know. We'd love to keep this conversation about Tinker Knight going. D, how we doing internet wise? You still good?
We are the expected amount of choppiness, so
Cool.
I will apologize for the intermittent drops.
Yeah, that's all good. Yeah, so disclaimer's over. Take it away. Tell me about
Sounds good.
Tinker Knight.
Yeah, let's talk Tinker. So if I may, I'd like to begin with a little anecdote.
Yes.
So when I first found out that there was going to be Exceed Shovel Knight, or Shovel Knight Exceed, whatever, don't care, that Shovel Knight characters are going to be an Exceed, I declared my mains before I knew anything about them, before I'd seen anything. I'm like, I'm maining these characters. And this guy was not among them. Because I'd played these games, and I'm like, what's the Tinker Knight thing? That you're like a runce? That you're kind of a wimpy little nerd who runs around? Like, that I didn't see what was exciting about this character, thinking about him from the boss fight perspective, from having played against him.
Sure.
Like, yeah, I'm not interested in Tinker Knight. He's not on my list.
Sure. Don't mind my mouse slowly drifting over to this card for no reason, by the way.
No reason at all.
No.
Yeah. And those who have played the game, I guess it's a spoiler. Anyway, there's more than just him running around his little runs in the boss fight from Shovel of Hope. But anyway, the final version of Tinker Knight realizes a fantasy that, well, you're not a runt, you're an engineer. And so it's true that you're not some big brawny dude swinging around, excessively unrealistically large weapons. You are programming unrealistically large weapons to go swing themselves around. Right. You're not thinking with your fists. You're punching with your brain. You're building a thing to solve your violent problems. There's just as much violence, but you're not getting your own hands dirty except with oil and grease.
With oil. And engine grease.
Engine grease specifically. Excuse me. Yes.
Yeah.
Worthy clarification. But yeah, so this guy actually very cool, and I really enjoy that fantasy. There's a few other characters in Exceed who have this kind of assembling theme of you're going to build something cool and then watch it go. I think he's the most direct execution of that fantasy, and I like it a ton. So I ended up picking up Tinker Knight as a main, even though it's not somebody that I thought that I would actually enjoy that much. All right.
Oh, awesome.
So yeah, let's talk about Tinker Knight.
Yep. I don't see anything weird about what just happened.
Yep. Well, actually, hold on. This isn't quite right. Here, can you Control C, Control V, Control V?
Second, Control C, Control V, Control V. How about that?
There we go. Now we have Tinker Knight. All right.
Yeah.
That's and I'll explain this metaphor. But a couple other interesting notes about Tinker Knight. He's the first character to take up more than one space, which he will in Exceed mode. Takes up 3 spaces.
The
He's the
large man.
second character to begin with not 30 life. So if you're starting game as Tinker Knight, you will cut yourself in half off the get, like right on the outset. You have 15 life.
Okay.
Life begins at half its maximum. Max is 30. Unless you're playing tag, which is a deprecated format. We'll not talk about that anyway. So, and I'm going to discuss 2 Tinker lines. The first, which should be pretty short to discuss, is kind of the default. It's what you will probably do automatically if you've never heard of this character and you pick him up and you look at what's going on and you read all his stuff and you go,
Nope.
cool. And the end of that thought was, and it works. There's nothing wrong with it. It's fine. It's what I would describe as a defensive, even a defensive set play kind of playstyle. It's not really the Tinker Knight that I play. It's not the Tinker Knight that I enjoy, but it's totally legitimate. There's not a thing in the world wrong with it. And it's reasonably intuitive. So, to explain why that's probably your default, let's talk about why there are 2 cards here.
Yes.
This is your starting character. Your life starts at half its maximum. When it would reach 0, you instead exceed at no cost. So you immediately flip.
Okay.
And now there's a pile of rules text. So when you exceed, set your life to 4 times the number of cards in your gauge to a maximum of 20. All right. Math wizards out there are going to realize quickly this means that you like to have at least 5 gauge.
Yep.
Because that means that you'll get 20 life, which means that you are not a 15 life character. You are a 35 plus life character.
Yes.
Right. You probably have between 35 and 40 effective life, depending on how hard you get hit on the turn that you would die.
Oh, sure. Because if I hit you with sweep and you have 1 life left, for example,
that's
that overage
5
doesn't
points
do
that you're not
anything.
taking.
Right.
Yep. Yeah.
Cool.
If you're at 1 life and you take a 20 damage hit, okay, you're taking 1 effective damage because you're just resetting to 20.
Got it.
So how much value you get out of that, like, extra cushion of invisible bonus life depends a lot on what's happening and what you get hit for. But it typically means that if you are exceeding with 5 gauge, then you have between 35 and 40 life. That is typical. Then there's a bunch of text that describes that the board resets, which means that no matter where you were, if you were kind of getting beaten up in the corner, or if you were beating up the opponent in the corner, or if you were sitting here at range 8 for some inexplicable reason, the board will reset, and then you get big. Now, once this has happened, you have a different character ability, which figures, because your life begins at half its maximum is not much of a character ability.
Right.
And that is the bottom line of this card. 2 lines, I guess. When resolving one of your special ultras, added its boost to it. So all of your attacks have additional stuff glued onto them. So it's like your boost is in play anytime you play any of your specials or ultras.
Okay.
Which, as we'll see later, dramatically buffs them. My goodness.
Yeah.
Holy cow. Ridiculous.
Looking at these really quickly. So just as a point of comparison, Flail in front side mode is a 1/3/6. Flail, when exceeded, is a 1/3/6/3/3 hit push 3.
Yep.
Correct? Okay. So with all of these, you just take the boost, glue it onto the attack, and that's your new attack.
Yep. Exactly.
Cool.
That's how it works, and that's why you will tend to go, oh, wow. So every gauge is 4 life. Okay, I'm going to play to get gauge and keep gauge, and then have 5 gauge when I exceed.
Yep.
And that's fine. So that under that line of play, you're going to be looking for your blocks, which you can probably get into gauge, provided you're not up against somebody with full board ignore armor, which is pretty rare. You're going to be looking for your on-curve attacks, so things like assault, cross, grasp, sometimes dive. You don't need dive as much, though, because you actually have an above curve range 4 option. Nice little mobile gear here. This is your fastest with respect to curve card, because it is actually above curve. And you'll like to have some focus and some sweep, but you like focus and missiles because they have armor, where you're like, well, I'm going to stretch my 15 life out as long as I can. And then this has some... the positioning on missiles means that you can play the attack on defense. It's fairly reliable. And even if you don't hit because they played, a dive at range 3 or a cross at range 1 or something, or range 2, you have a little armor, and you have an after that lets you reposition them so that the next strike, which is probably your turn because you played it in defense, you can win. You can say, we're going to be at this range because I have the right follow-up for this range.
Okay.
So missiles is great for that. In fact, well, I'll talk later about my line, but regardless of what line you play, missiles is very, very useful for that reason. That after effect is super good at letting you do what you want the next strike.
Okay.
All right, so these are great stable tools. You also are going to love to have this boost, which is a weird looking pile of text, because this is two different boosts. If you're in basic mode, the front side, this guy, it is just this now effect because it discards itself.
Yes.
If you're in exceed mode, then it's just the top part because the now effect says if you're not in exceed mode, right? So this is actually two boosts packed into one. That's why there's so much text.
Okay. And so for the now effect, and I'm sure we'll get into this in a second, but the one of the reasons I assume that the line of play that you're describing as a default is because all of these boosts are very, very expensive. And I as a new player would look at 4 force cost on armor plating and be like, oh, no way. That's too steep. But on this line, this lets you play this for the cost of 1 ultra rather than 4 force.
Yeah, like this makes these a 2 force boost, basically, where you just go, okay, I can just play this boost to play this boost. And so typically, where you're going to be going, all right, I use this to play wrench toss, which is power speed and advance, which is super, super flexible.
Yep.
Tons of safety. It's great. Like lets you play things like, well, it lets you play almost anything you want if you're in the right position for it, which is almost any position. It's incredible.
Sure.
Right. You can play a really, really good range 1 spike there, for example. And yeah, lots of silly stuff. But so you will use this boost to play this boost. You will never pay the cost of any of these boosts, not honestly.
Right.
And you will value these attacks. And you will probably save these 2 attacks. And this one too.
Okay.
And that's kind of how this shapes. And then most of your play is normals. You're just like, all right, I'm going to be trying to build a 5 gauge. Build a 5 gauge safely. Play on curve. Like play defensively. Boost light. Boost the +2 speed, which is on sweep. Like just play as safely as you can. Play blocks. Build 5 gauge. So once you get to 5 gauge, you're like, all right, my extra life is locked in for maximum value. And now you can kind of play normally with the rest of your hands. Because the premise of this line of play is if you are playing like any other Exceed character and you are trading on average evenly or up, well, you got 5 to 10 life more than the opponent.
Sure.
Cool. Like you just win that way, right? Like, if you're just trading evenly and you have more life than them, then you win.
Right. And so on this line, you would be very, very careful to not go below that 5 gauge once you've hit it.
Yeah, once you've hit 5 gauge, you don't spin gauge.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, you might look at like for example, your opponent strikes and you wild swing and they played focus and you top deck this. And you're like, oh wow, this stuns focus. This is a 6 power ignore armor at speed 2.
Right.
Invalid. Next card.
Invalid. Yeah.
Yeah.
No matter how good that is in this situation, if
that cost me 3 gauge. Well,
sure,
cost me 2 because you get 1 back, but still.
Right. If I'm doing the math on this, it's like, okay, so 1 gauge is worth 4 life. This is 3 gauge. Am I getting hit for 12 on this focus? Is how it would work out under this kind of paradigm. And the answer is no.
I think
so
8
this is invalid.
Yeah, 8 if you account for this hitting itself. But
that's right. Okay, so
since you deal damage with it.
Right.
But yeah, like if you're looking at each gauge as 4 life, you go, wow, how much am I spending? And it's hard to say it's worth it.
Sure.
On this ultra, and on this ultra, it's just impossible to play. Like, look at this amazing stat line: power 3, speed 3.
Right.
Yeah, that is a garbage ultra if I've ever seen one. And for 3 gauge, wow.
Yeah.
Obviously, this card is not telling the whole story, but this printed stat line, terrible.
Sure.
And in fact, this before effects means that it can miss at janky ranges. Generally, if you're far enough away from the corner, at range 3, I believe, is where it misses.
Right.
Yeah, push. Yeah, because at 2, you push 3, close 4. Yeah, so at 3 or more, it will miss, even though it looks like it has a close effect.
Right.
Because you actually kick them out of range. Goofy card. My goodness, so terrible. Awful as printed. You would never play it, except when you will, which I'll get to later.
Right.
But yeah, but for the sake of like you're playing defensively, you're playing conservatively, you're building up your 5 gauge, and then you're holding on to it. You're clutching in on a death grip because that is part of how you're getting enough life that you can win the game when you're just kind of trading like an average character.
Right. On this
because
line, if I have 6 or 7 gauge D, am I okay to spend back down to 5, or do I have better
yeah,
use for my gauge in the later game?
no, you can spend it down. Fiber 6 is the most that you'll need, and I'll explain in a minute like what happens when you exceed, which changes the play pattern to cause you to start to spin gauge rapidly. Um, but the short answer is you want 5. 6 is good, but you really need 5. If you get to 6, great. If you get to 7, start spending stuff. And what you should be spending is stuff that you want to need to reshuffle,
Right.
because you're going to you're going to burn a lot of options out. And if you're low on life and you're low on options, then your opponent can bully you with what they have left, and that can be a significant problem.
Right.
Because after you drop to 0 and reset the board and flip over, you are now arguably weaker than you were before.
Interesting. Despite the fact that you have these
All your
crazy
cards are
boosts on
massively
your
better,
attack. Yeah.
but you have a massive, massive hidden drawback, which isn't hidden at all, but it's really hard to see as a drawback. You take up 3 spaces.
You have a big hurt box, basically.
You have a huge hurt box.
Right.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. So in fighting game terms, right, the hitbox of your attack is the range that you throw out there, and it doesn't change. Right.
Right.
If you stand here and you play a grasp, you're hitting here.
Right.
Or here. Right. Like you're hitting range 1, and you're calculating from the space closest to the opponent.
Right.
If you throw out, let's see, sure, missiles. Well, missiles hits the whole board. That's great. 1 of 3.
Yep.
Cool. Spike, 2 to 3.
Still doesn't hit that range 1.
Still doesn't hit here, because you can't just calculate from your back shoulder. You're calculating from whatever's closest to the opponent.
Oh, but
whereas Ryu,
my opponent can range 1 spike me, hits here and here, and that's me still.
Yep.
Okay.
He plays spike and he hits.
Gotcha.
And for a lot of characters, that's even more deadly than it sounds, because they look at their pile of cards and go, oh man, I have this really awkward card with like a minimum range, but it sure would be great if my opponent couldn't get out of the range of it. Right. Oh, hey, look!
Yeah.
You've solved my problems. Allow me to play my range 3 stun immune card that hits for 8. Right?
You start wild swinging forever because everything I have hits here. Like I can basically just ignore the fact that my cards have a minimum range sometimes.
Exactly.
Okay.
The other drawback of this pattern here is I've assumed that you've traded evenly, right?
Right.
But if you haven't, because your cards are not impressive. Your cards as printed are cards, but your powers are 3, 3, 4 with the 1 armor, 2.
Right.
And then this one's 4, but it's kind of a lie. But it does also a 4 special, so it's also like the value on this one is a bit different. This is 2 cards for 4 or 6 damage, so you're still averaging out to about 3.
Hence why you're saying that probably play normals a lot on frontside Tinker under this line.
Exactly. And you like your counterattacks. You like your missiles, your sweeps, and your focuses, because otherwise you can often end up being out-traded heavily. And then if you get to an exceed mode and your opponent has 20 life and you have 20 life, and the opponent can't miss ever,
right,
it starts to look a little bad.
Sure.
Because you can't block a spike. You can't ever safely play a thing just on the assumption that you'll be out of range, because you're not out of range.
Right.
And that can be a pretty serious problem. And so, as I noted, there's a lot of character-specific things that it causes an even bigger problem for you for. But just looking at normals, spikes those stand out, where you go, oh, okay. Well, the opponent's spike and your dive, right? So right here, Tinker's dive does not beat sweep and it does not beat focus.
Tinker's dive doesn't. Oh yeah, okay. Because you can't move.
He can't move. He goes, I'm going to advance 3 and I can't, so I just stay here. I didn't move past you, so dive doesn't it doesn't cross up. I get hit. Right. And depending on exactly where the opponent is, he can run into that same issue with cross, where he goes, okay, cool. I anticipate a sweep. I play cross. Oops.
Uh-oh. Right. You can't.
I'm still in range. Yeah.
You don't fit.
Yeah. Like people like to point out the cool thing, which is very true, which is right here, sweep hits everything.
Yeah.
That's true. But the opponent's sweep always hits you.
Right.
Because there's nowhere you can stand that you're safe from sweep, and you're also going to be threatened by focus and cross and spike.
And so hence on this line, that additional, 5 to 10 life overage that you have over your opponent is crucial.
You need it.
because you're never
Yeah.
going to be dodging things. You're always going to be trading at this point, and you better be trading up.
Yes.
Right.
So let's talk about how you do that, especially the moment that you exceed. Because the moment that you exceed, you get a few shining moments where whichever line you're playing, you're going to be awesome.
Okay.
That's because you have a ton of gauge, and now you're in exceed mode, and the board has reset.
It doesn't spend your gauge, of course. It just
It doesn't
checks how
spend
much
it.
is into your gauge. I got it. All right. So that's why you're not necessarily spent, like you said, having 5 or 6 gauge. One more is cool.
Yeah, one more is cool because so what's going to happen is you're going to exceed, and then especially on this line that I've been describing, you didn't play this card because this card is terrible. You would never play this card.
Right.
Now you play this card.
Right.
And if you have the EX, you play the EX because with the EX, it doesn't lose to dive, which means that it's unbeatable. You are playing a speed 4 8 power that hits the entire board.
Right, and this is because his character ability on Exceed side extends to both specials and ultras. So this gets the +4 power, +2 guard. Gets pretty unreasonable pretty quickly.
Yeah, like this becomes a 7 power with plenty of guard. It still loses to dive because the opponent can dive over you.
Right.
So if you play it EX, you say, okay, here's my EX mech charge. You die. Right? Like you can hit me with an assault, that's fine. I'll take 3, you'll take 8. And you will end up here, which by the way is designed to set up that other card I mentioned that you won't play under this line.
Yep.
Drill Arm. Where you go, hey, now you're up against the wall. You better do something about that, or you're about to take 9.
9, right? Which is kind of ultra costed anyway, or I'm sorry, ultra payout anyway.
Yeah, like it is at the same. It is more damage actually than mech charge, right? So this is 7 and this is 9.
Right.
The catch is that the positioning on this is a pretty steep requirement because amusingly, just like any other character, you only cost 1 to move over. So setting aside that you're Ryu, right? Any character can say, I'm taking the walk action. I'll pay 1, 2.
Yeah, or 2 force rather to get the other side of you. Yeah.
Yeah, like they don't have to worry about these other spaces because they're not counting spaces, they're counting a character.
Right. So very force efficient movement for your opponent because you're so big.
And if they boost run, we're like advance up to 3, like, all right, I'll advance 1, 2, 3.
Right. And
because you never count your opponent's space when you're moving.
Right, make some distance on you even.
Yep. Okay. So yeah, they can kind of leap over you and get out of the corner. And you don't have great ways to get them back in, like to get them back over you into a corner. You have pretty good ways to get them pushed into the opposite corner.
Right.
But yeah, so this is kind of your payout sequence: is you throw mech charge or EX mech charge, and then you have drill arm and you threaten this mix up. If you still have bomb bounce, if you didn't boost it twice, which maybe you boosted it twice.
Right.
And you say, okay, I'm hitting for 9 or I'm killing block.
Right.
And if you have a significant life lead, if they're low enough, there's often going to be times where you can just say, all right, bomb bounce wins.
Yep.
Like you don't have dive, and if I'm standing anywhere near the center, it just hits the entire arena. You lose. Like take 6, it's stun immune, it ignores armor, you're dead.
Yep.
And so that's why you like to have the gauge that you can afford your ultras, because your ultras are good when you're in exceed mode.
Sure.
Yeah, this is kind of what your payout turns into. Is you are going to throw a mech charge if you at all can, and then you want to have drill arm, and you would like to also have this as a mix up. But these two lead off. Here's how you actually accomplish the trading up for winning the game at the end of your turtling and your hoarding.
Right.
And you've got some other nice cards, but these are the pinnacle of that.
These are kind of your payout that you're trying to save for the end game under this line.
Yep. And very little is as horrifying as staring down the barrel of a loaded EX mech charge into EX drill arm.
Right.
Like it doesn't gain advantage, thankfully, or Tinker would be kind of unstoppable on that exact sequence. But
on that one turn when he flips, yeah.
Yeah, like generally he's going to die on the strike that his opponent initiated, which means that he will then throw his payout as he'd hoped, and you will probably eat it. Like you probably can't do much about it.
Yep.
You can mitigate the damage as best you can. You can play your block. You can play your focus. You can play assaults to just come in and hit him first. If he only plays one card, then you can probably play a dive.
Dive to get over it, sure.
Yep, and then he may or may not have played a mix up, right? He still has normals. He can still play just assaults,
Right.
And he has his speed 5 button as I mentioned before, so like he can do that. But yeah, by default, he's going to throw a mech charge at you, and you can't stop it. And then he's going to be holding a drill arm, and you have to do something to stop it, or it will end you.
Right.
Yeah, so that's
Quick
kind of you have flips, that's your payout. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
quick note, like bookkeeping or rules note question I have for you. If my opponent plays their dive and they're here, they make it all the way across, right?
And
Uh,
then one.
and then one more. Yeah. So they wind up here. So the reason that you couldn't play your dive in the position that you described earlier is not necessarily because you would overlap your opponent. It's because the corner's there, right?
It's not. Yeah, it's not overlapping. It's the wall, right?
Okay.
So
So
here,
I can't fit in this space.
yeah, you can't fit here and you can't fit here, which means right
Right.
here there is no way for Tinker to move past you.
Right. Okay.
Like from Tinker's perspective, you might as well be against the wall.
Right. Because there's no room for
Yeah,
how big
as
his
far
fist
as his
is.
movement's concerned, he can obviously
Right.
still push you, but as far as like him advancing past you, he can't advance past you.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Thank you. Just making sure.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, definitely happy to clarify that.
Yep. So under this line, and the way that you're describing it, this is sort of like the if not the intended way to play Tinker, kind of the obvious way to play Tinker, that you would be looking at these things and you're saying, okay, these are all too expensive to boost. Just gonna rush exceed side, blow up my opponent. Looks like D just left again. D, can you still hear me?
I lost you from under this line.
Under this line, I so to restart my thought, I feel like if not the intended line to play Tinker, at least sort of the obvious one. I can't afford these boosts. I'm just going to rush exceed. Um, I'm going to uh, blow them up on exceed side in a couple of turns. So what changed, or is it just that this line has it wasn't like a meta shift? It's that this line has some weaknesses that became not tenable for you.
Well, it's not. You've got it the it's the other way around, right? So I don't know how much should I go into dev stories when I talk about this. What do you prefer?
I think that's fine. We had Mad from Order on talking about early playtest versions of Beheaded, and that was
Nice.
actually super interesting. So yeah, please go ahead.
All right. So I'll go ahead and confirm what we're talking. That's the intended line. This
Right,
is how Tinker was made to work. These are costed at 4 so that you won't play them. Well, so that you won't pay for them. This
right,
obviously
because of
exists so that
within
you
my
can,
reach. Sure.
yeah, get one into play.
Right,
But yeah, the whole point is that you look at these and you go, well, I can't afford that. I'm not doing that. And you stockpile your 5 gauge, and then you flip. You do a big cool ultra thing, and then you start throwing haymakers, and you hope that they die first.
right.
And it works, and it's cool, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's the intended line.
Okay.
From the first time I played this version of Tinker, it's not what I did. Because when I pick up a character, I want to do the thing that looks like it is the coolest thing, the most exciting thing, or in playtesting, the best thing.
Sure.
And so it's not that I saw a weakness in this line. It's that what I immediately saw was what looked to me like a stronger line.
Okay.
And so that's what I did instead.
Sure.
All right. Now we'll come back to why I brought out 3 Akumas. Which is so the other line that I'm going to talk about. My preferred line is aggressive set play Tinker Knight, which is so if the one Tinker Knight version can be summarized as, hey, you've got 35 or 40 life, like use it, right?
Right.
This version can be summarized as, okay, but have you read these boosts?
Right.
Right? Like most of these boosts used properly say you win the strike.
Sure.
Like the weakest among them numerically is this one, because it costs 2 additional force, and it is just +2 power, and it has a range blind spot, so it
Right.
doesn't work at range 1.
Right.
Though you don't commit the extra 2 force anyway, and that's still like strong. It's just very very expensive.
It's just costly. Sure.
Yeah, but like let's look at some interactions for all of these other ones. Let's start here and go. All right, force feedback means that your dive becomes a 7 power attack with 5 guard that hits at ranges 1 to 4.
Yep. You get a canny effect for one turn, basically.
Yep.
Okay.
And in fact, 7 power and 5 guard is roughly Spiral Arrow. If you're exceeded Kami, then you have a 6 power 1 armor, which is the same delta.
Yep.
Where you go, oh well, I just have an attack that doesn't lose to anything. it probably beats anything slower, either by stunning or by crossing over, and anything faster, I'm going to hit you. You can't stun me.
Right.
I have 5 guard. Cool. So, that works. 3 armor, 3 guard. This doesn't actually change all that many interactions, but it changes one notable one, which is that your assaults beats grasp, assaults, dive, depending on the situation. It was already going to beat dive, so I didn't care so much about that. And sweep, because it now pushes 3.
Right.
Right? And in fact, if the opponent's in the corner, your grasp beats sweep, because you can pull 2, push 3.
Right, because you can order the trigger to do grasp's trigger first and then armor plating's trigger.
Exactly.
Right.
So the push effect is usually, actually, I find, the more impactful part of this boost in changing card interactions.
Okay.
The armor is, well, if you were going to trade, you'll trade way up.
Right.
But the hit effect can be the thing that dramatically changes how the strike plays out.
Right, because often that means that you're not going to trade at all. Like, and if they play focus, okay, well, I take 1.
Yep.
Right.
Which, yeah, that's kind of how these 2 boosts work in my experience. Is that these are the boosts where you go, well, I guess if we're stuck trading, I'm going to win that trade.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
I'm going to have +2 power, and I'll have enough guard to make sure that I can trade, or I'm going to have +3 armor, and I'm going to force you to play something that don't necessarily want to play, or otherwise you'll get shoved out of range.
Right. So it occurs to me that
mhm.
that like when we were describing the previous Tinker line, when we flip, we have when resolving one of your specials or alters, add the effects of its boost to it. So what that means is that on this line, when we're playing these boosts as intended for free on Exceed side, I can put arcing projectiles onto missiles specifically for free.
Not
I
just
can
can. You have to. It is
you
part of
do
it.
it right, yeah. So if I was going to
Matters
put it on,
for this one.
yeah, if I
Yeah.
was going to put it onto another card, I'd have to pay the force.
Yes,
Is
if
what
you want to
is what I
play
meant.
that boost from your hand to attach to something else, you have to
Right.
actually pay the force, or
Right.
use. Well, actually, in Exceed mode, you have to pay the force.
So does that mean that again, with the intended line of play, that these boosts are kind of balanced around being attached to the card that they're on? So
Yes.
mobile gear does not become overwhelmingly strong with force feedback, but something else might.
Yes, 100%. In
Okay,
fact,
cool.
that's why I pointed out dive with mobile gear, right?
Right.
Well, look at mobile gear. It's a before advance 3 with a printed range of 1. It's a dive like, but it's a dive like that has different stats that aren't as crazy with force feedback.
Right. When you put 2 power onto 3, you aren't beating sweep. Dive being 2 power stronger means that it does, and that's okay. So the actual like the the benefit of these boosts isn't just that they're big and crazy stat monsters on the card that they're on, like on frontside Tinker. Under this line, you're saying that they're also just flexibly applied to any other attack that you want to apply them to, and that's where the force cost comes in. Okay, cool.
And at that point, they generally are worth what you're paying for. At least that's been my experience.
Right. Okay. Whether they were meant to be or not, that's kind of irrelevant. The reality is that dive with this is worth 4 sometimes.
Yep. So and so let me point out. Here's another good example of this interaction. Right. So flail has hit push 3 on this boost, but it doesn't beat sweep because the attack on it has after advance 2. So this attack was designed to not beat sweep.
Right.
But you attach it to most other things, and now they'll beat sweep just fine.
Sure. Okay.
Right. Same token on Wrench Toss. Wrench Toss with this boost is a speed 6, power 4, so it's going to lose to sweep and focus if you play it at like range 3 or 4.
Right.
Because it'll jump in and poke and then just get hit back.
Yeah, you'll walk in. So this is like an above curve option on Exceed side. But +2 power, +2 speed. Like this is Way of the Warrior.
But you put this boost on
better.
a dive,
sure,
or a spike or a cross, depending on the board state that you're in, and you go, oh, now it just wins.
Yeah.
Right? Like at minimum, you look at dive and you go, all right, speed 6 with before advance 2, and then before advance 3, if you move past the opponent, you can't be hit, means that I can hit any space in the board, more or less.
Right.
Excuse me. And then +2 power on top of that.
Right. And probably not get hit back because I can order my triggers in a way that gets me past them.
Exactly.
Right.
Right. I'm not going to try to do the board math of exactly how, but I think it can hit every space, or it can hit almost every space, if that's not quite true.
Sure.
There might be like 3 spaces it can't hit.
Right. In very specific positions. Right. So, but most of the time, +2/+2 advance 2 is a lot.
Yes. And importantly, like anything that has a blind spot, there's something else that doesn't. So you can just play across and go, yeah, so now the cross hits ranges 1 to 4, and then it backs out 3 spaces. And so you're going to just hit for 5 at speed 8 and leave.
Yep.
Like, okay. Similar story here. Drill Arm becomes a range 1 to 3, does get 7 power. That's a notable breakpoint by itself.
Yep.
Where like, oh, 7 printed power just beats sweep by itself. That's really good. And then it might become 9, which means it beats focus, which is nutty.
Yeah, and that's kind of why you highlighted this as being sort of a centerpiece of his Exceed side strategy. That Drill Arm with the boost actually is pretty damn good.
Yep, this is the one where it's kind of all baked in to go, oh, actually that is insane. Huh.
Right. Hence
like it's not
special.
It doesn't balance against itself. It actually is that good.
Right.
But you put +0 to 2 range +3 power on something and you go, cool. Like now my grasp at range 3 does 6 damage and beats everything in the world because it's speed 7 and it beats sweep and also beats focus because we're at range 3. Like you can't do anything about that.
Right.
You stand at range 5 if the opponent's back is to the wall and you just play a sweep or a spike and they probably just die.
Right.
Like there's not much they can do about that if you have the appropriate threats to actually execute on that.
Right. So I've noticed, D, that this whole time when we've been describing like what to put these ridiculous expensive boosts on,
have you noticed it?
Yeah, you're talking about normals almost exclusively, probably because his attacks aren't that great. So can you basically just sum up this line of play at absolute, like as zoomed out as possible, is boost special, play normal? Oh man, I lost D at the perfect time. It's a dramatic pause. Hello,
man. D. My internet really wanted to make that dramatic. Can I sum up this line of play?
I was making the exact same joke.
Yep. As zoomed out as possible and then you cut out for me. I'm like, as what? As what?
Could you describe this line of play as basically play special, or rather boost special, play normal?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
with important exceptions.
Sure, of course.
Yeah. And I'll run through that in great detail. But let me talk about the last one here, which is the printed force cost of 2 on an ultra. So I don't know if we talked about this before, but an ultra is worth 2 force and a normal or special is worth 1 force, right? And you describe them to force cost, which means that an ultra boost is usually worth 1 more than its quote unquote printed value. Because the effective force cost of playing the ultra boost is that you're giving up 1 extra force for doing it. Does it make sense?
Right. Yeah. So this is really 5, for example. This is really 5 because it's 4 and
because you count the card itself.
Sure.
Right. And so this is actually really 4, which means it even if you look at it that way, it's actually cheaper than all the other ones.
Yes.
And it's a +4 power boost. It also has +2 guard on it, and the +2 guard usually not important.
Right.
+2 guard by itself is not a breakpoint. It matters a ton if you have an EX attack, and it matters if you have if your opponent has a power boost or if you have something like Drill Arm, where you have kind of a shaky printed defensive stat. But the only card he has that is that way is Drill Arm.
Right.
Yeah. So it's mostly matters for EXs.
Right. Okay.
But mostly this is a 2 force ultra boost that is +4 power.
Yeah, and I guess the idea is if you're hitting for +4 power on a fast enough card, why do I care if I'm being stunned?
Right.
Because I'm going to stun you, and you're not going to hit me back if I play on or above curve.
Right. Yeah. So I mentioned the X attacks, right? Like, all right, Tinker Knight looks at Assault and is like, okay, well, I can guarantee, quote unquote, guarantee a gauge, not strictly guaranteed, right? But I might get hit by a sweep. Well, now I have an 8 power Assault.
Right.
Or I have a 9 power EX Assault.
Yep.
I win. Like you can't do much but just lose to that.
Right.
You can even stand at range 1 and play this and have a 7 power grasp where you'll trade with focus by taking 4 and dealing 5.
Yeah.
You're pretty okay with that. It's a pretty good trade.
Yeah, in terms of trading with focus, yeah. And with grasp especially, right? Like that
your grasp beat their focus by trading up.
Yeah.
Not usually a thing that happens with grasp and focus.
Definitely not.
Yeah, so this is on the pricey side, make no mistake, but it is a very, very strong boost.
Right.
This is this paradigm, by the way, of I'm going to play a boost that is horrifying, that makes you question your existence, and that says that I'm winning the next strike so hard I'm winning 2 or 3 strikes at once.
Right.
That paradigm is why we started joking about it, about Tinker Knight being 3 Kumas in a trench coat.
Sure.
Right? Is you go, oh man, I'm going to win the strike so hard I'm winning 3 strikes. That's the thing that Akuma does.
Yes.
Insert reference to Akuma video here. I don't need to go into Akuma right now.
Right.
But this idea of like, hey, I don't have to win that many strikes if I win them for 8 to 10 damage.
Sure. Yeah, my opponent doesn't have that much life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the very first time I picked up this version of Tinker, these boosts were all cheaper, and I played them all and went up to the dev and was like, hey, this guy's awesome. He feels great. He's probably overpowered.
Right.
And whereupon the dev asked me, how much life did you have when you exceed? And I was like, why would I exceed?
Yeah, why would I do
that? It's like, hold on, what do you mean? Did you lose them? I'm like, no. Have you seen his boosts?
Right.
Like, his boosts are amazing.
So these got bumped up in force cost because of you, then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I then had to talk him down from bumping them up to 5 because I kept playing them, and he was like, oh man, you're still playing them. Should I just make them 5 force? I'm like, no. It's interesting now. It's fine. Don't make them 5.
Right.
It's good that this line exists because it's cool and it's interesting.
Yeah.
But yes, he was ready to make these 5 force.
Okay.
So the intent was that you don't pay the costs.
So when you're playing Tinker, exceeding is something that you would prefer to never do at all. You would rather just win on front side, and if you exceed, it's because your opponent has made you exceed, not because you are gunning for it.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Exactly. I think it would be accurate to say that right now, I can, like, when I'm playing against very experienced players, I can fairly often be forced to exceed eventually.
Right.
And that wasn't always true. It took a while, I think, for people to get used to how to deal with this little monster.
Right.
Because I definitely, for a very long time, just never exceeded a Tinker Knight.
Right. So, I mean, when I first heard about this, prior to, probably on your YouTube channel at some point, prior to actually talking to you about Tinker, I kind of assumed it was like for like King of Fighter fans out there, like Rugal taking his coat off. Like, okay, you've beaten my first form. Now I'm going to actually try. And the exceed side was something that you were forced into because the rest of the time you had been like limiting yourself to only play on front side
against funny.
New players.
It's just the opposite.
It's
just the opposite.
Yeah, this is your loss condition, basically.
Yeah, if I'm exceeding, it means that I have actually been outplayed in neutral and front side. Which is, in my opinion, a serious accomplishment. I have good neutral, and this guy has good neutral.
Right.
Because a not uncommon situation in with this kind of character is where you're sitting at range 3, and I go, okay, I've got 3 gauge, I've got 3 cards in hands. Discard 2 gauge and 2 cards in hand and play this boost, and then I draw 1 card. I've got 1 card in hand, and it was the top card of my deck. And my opponent looks at that and is like, "You're insane for committing to this boost without knowing the top card of your deck because you're what if that's a block or something? What if it's garbage?" I'm like, "Well, if it is, I got the next card, right? I've got 2 pulls and a boost that is so good that there's probably only 2 or 3 cards in my deck that don't work with it.
That don't work, sure.
And that's an important premise I want to point out here is that these boosts, specifically this one to start with, this one to a lesser extent depending on the board state that you're in, but this boost most of all, like, these are so strong that it's okay to wild swing with them.
Right.
You don't actually have to stock an answer because most of your deck is awesome with these boosts because these boosts are themselves awesome. This is especially true if you manage to get early on your blocks, which you can then pitch as force to pay the cost of these.
Sure.
So we talked earlier about the math, right? About how, if a card engage is worth 4 life. So let me point this out then, right? If you're paying 1 or 2 cards from gauge, that's like giving up 8 life. But if it means that you will win the next strike cleanly and deal 6 or more damage, and the opponent who would have hit you for 4 or more damage is dealing nothing, then that's a delta of 10.
That's actually more, right?
Right. Like, obviously, I'm picking some numbers here. Not every strike is going to work that way, right? If you throw this and they played a block, you're like, I paid 2 gauge and they blocked. That's pretty bad,
right?
But or if you actually get something super hard wrongly read and they played an EX and you ended up losing completely, that's very bad. Sure. And that actually, I think, to me, is what made this line so interesting, is that it does require you to do a lot of those calculations and go, okay, is my loss condition acceptable? Because if you aren't sure how good the rest of your deck is, if you aren't sure why you're playing this boost, then it's probably a bad idea to play it.
Right. Knowing that in addition to the boost and the strike, you are also committing 4 more force, means that you're kind of always on a high wire. It sounds like when
Mm-hmm.
you're playing him, but it's like you're on a high wire, but you also just like have a gun or something.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
that's great.
don't let the
Exactly.
recoil of the gun knock you off the high wire, but also your opponent might just get shot.
Right.
Right.
And it works because, like, it works if you know that it works, but you do need to actually have things in mind where you go, oh, my opponent has +2 speed in play. Don't play this range boost. Like, that's if you're standing at range 3 and you go, okay, I can now play a grasp that is speed 7. Well, they can play an assault that's speed 7.
Right.
You're not safe, right? You like running these defensively is super dangerous.
Right.
What you want to do is you want to open a boost war.
Sure. Okay,
and then
yeah,
ask them to answer it.
So that's kind of why you say that he has good neutral. This is when you're playing those boosts. You're not trying to answer with them. So, and I'm looking at these. None of these have now strike because they wouldn't.
Correct.
Because they're supposed to be.
They don't have any now
onto,
effects. Yeah. With one exception, which is if you're not in XP mode. So
right. And so you never, unless things have gone wrong in your game, you never get stun immunity ignore guard. This is a way to play another boost for free or for undercosted.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I want to, and this is notable for both lines of Tinker love this boost. This boost is really, really good.
Sure.
And I want to do this, but I'm not always going to glue it to these 2 boosts because I'm expecting to play more than 4 total boosts out of this set of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Yeah, 10.
Right.
2 copies of each card. Just doing math.
Sure.
12. There we go. Thought something was off there. So like I'm expecting to play more than 4 of these absurdly powerful, absurdly expensive boosts. So this is 2 of them.
Yep.
And then I'm going to pay for them at least twice, probably 3 or 4 times.
Right.
But like that does mean that I need to be using this because I can't afford to do it honestly 6 times. Like I don't have that much force.
Right.
Even if I'm burning out my gauge.
So I wonder if it's even worth it then to go through like the kit as we sometimes do. I mean, like we've been talking about the boosts. We've sort of mentioned some of the attack shapes that work, but it seems like the thing that you just said about like this boost, it does not matter what you put it on. For
to a significant extent, it does not. Yeah.
Yeah. So and if we're really like we're never really going to be playing wrench toss as an attack outside of a wild swing situation where you already have a crazy boost on top of it or something. Like so, it seems like the actual difficulty in or rather what we should be focusing on in a tinker oriented guide would be like where your economy is and how to afford these crazy boosts that say win a strike.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and let me point out another thing. So I already pointed this out with regard to the other line. I'm going to point out with this line too. This after effect, deceptively important. So this is an attack that works just fine with no boosts. It's a perfectly stable, like sweep-like, right? It has 6 total defenses, 1 armor, 5 guard, range 1 to 3. And this after effect says you can put them where you want them, even if you miss, which means that you decide the conditions of the next strike. If you're using it on offense, then you decide the conditions under which they have to do something because you have decided that you're okay responding to them.
Right.
This might mean, for example, that you put them in the corner when you have a cross in hands, and you're like, all right, you're in the corner at range 2. If you want to initiate with your cross, okay, sure. Anything else you play, I'll win with my cross.
Right, and they're less likely to initiate with their cross because they're in the corner. They're not going anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Right, and if they're in the corner at range 1, it's real dicey to do something like that when you're holding something like Drillline.
Sure.
But yeah, so this positioning is important, and it's positioning that happens during a strike. Often it's a strike that your opponent initiates, so that you get to decide your turn, but sometimes it's one you initiated. Either way, it's movement that doesn't cost you anything.
Right.
Sneaking in stuff like that is important. This also means that when this boost is in play, you need to think about this before effect, not just as confirming your hit, but as giving you a follow up. Yeah. So
right.
So I'm not going off topic. I am talking about economy. I'm talking about how you get the positions you need efficiently.
Definitely. Yeah. So and because of how like everything that you are spending on force for these boosts with force is not going towards movement, is not going towards changing cards.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not likely to take the walk action if you can help it ever, because
Right.
it's turn and it's force. And
Right.
you would much rather go, okay, how do I got it? Yeah, so it's a turn and force, and you would much rather figure out how to compress your movement into strikes, where you go, I'm not going to spend time and money making myself move. I'm going to figure out how I spend my time building resources and building setup so that during a strike I can create the position that I need, and I will already have the resources I need, because I'm not gaining resources during strikes. Like, that's not how Exceed works.
Right. Sure.
Uh, even Jen, even Giovanna don't really gain much resources in strikes. They are converting them.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, strikes tend to be resource negative. It's just part of the engine. So given that strikes are resource negative, you need to and relatedly, many characters I do not like taking the prepare action. As Tinker, I will.
Okay.
Because when I take the prepare action, I'm drawing half of a boost that's going to kill you.
Right.
Right. I'm drawing 2 of the 4 cards I need to win a strike, and so I need to be able to hold my ground for 2 out of 3 turns, because every third turn I can do something incredibly stupid.
Right.
So I'm willing to take that prepare action because I don't have other ways to get cards efficiently. Right.
Are there any cards that you won't spend as force for a boost? Like, are there any that are like is there like a triage system where you're saying like, okay, uh, I don't want to spend the one that I'm going to hit him with, but other than that, I'm okay with spending anything.
All right. So the most valuable boost is Turbocharger. Sorry, Rocket Fuel. Man, I swear these names must have switched in testing. I always get this wrong. Anyway, Rocket Fuel.
Right.
So I'm not going to pay wrench toss on most things unless I have another wrench toss. I don't want to
Okay.
lose my last Rocket Fuel.
Okay.
Boost is so good. It's nutty. So that's number one of I don't want to pay that card if I can possibly help it. Bomb Bounce is a weird case where it's like, yeah, I'll totally pay that card as force in Exceed mode. In basic mode, you're obviously just going to boost it, right? Like, that's
Sure.
not... So it's a weird factor. So in Exceed mode, it's like, yeah, totally happy to throw that away. In basic mode, you're boosting it, so it doesn't really go on the scale.
Right.
Because it's not... Yeah, it's the bottom end of the scale if you're paying it as force.
Right.
Drill Arm is up here. So Drill Arm is a bit interesting because this is an attack that I'm very, very reluctant to use, and a great boost. The attack costs a force, and is a bit situational. And the boost is strong, but it relies on me having ranged tools and ranged threats that can contend with my opponent's stuff effectively. This mostly means range 3 grasp.
Yeah.
Or range 5 spike and sweep. Like, those are the 2 big situations where I'm like, okay, this boost is now phenomenal.
Right.
At range 1, this is giving me probably a very positive trade, but it's not guaranteeing anything, and it's not even guaranteeing that, because at range 1, my opponent can dive over my sweep.
Right.
My opponent can dive over my focus. Like, it's not guaranteeing anything. So I like this boost, but, like, yeah, this is a boost that I value, but if I'm not going to be able to play the boost in the near future, then I'll happily pay it as force.
Okay.
It's just in a weird situation because of that. Missiles, I will tend to not pay as force because of how valuable the attack is.
Yep.
I'm never playing this boost unless I desperately need to. I've got 2 other effective range boosts. I don't need this one. But if I have neither of them in hand, okay. If I need range, I need range.
Right.
I have played Arcing Projectiles, and it has been correct. It's just very, very rare.
It's a rare situation, sure.
Yeah, because I would much rather just have this, which, like, look at these. Do you want +1 to 2 range and +2 power, or +0 to 2 range and +3 power?
Right. Yeah.
And this one costs 2 extra force.
Right.
Like, this is just better.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, I can say strictly better. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
I guess I'll quibble. If getting rid of force is a good thing for you, then it's not strictly better. But
Right.
it's not. So moving on.
Right.
Yeah. So these cards are kind of interesting, where I make pretty good use of Flail as a utility attack, where I can duck under things sometimes, and it's also like a decent range 1 button because it draws a card.
Okay.
And so I'm like, all right. I especially like having an EX Flail around, where I have an extra speed 7 that isn't grasp.
Sure.
Right. Flail is also a decent way to confirm stuff like your Rocket Fuel, your Turbochargers. There, I said both names, so I couldn't mix them up. Anyway, where it's now a range, works at range 2 and 3, at speed many, power decent, and then probably pops you into a different position. Like
Yep.
this after effects, as long as the positioning that I'm getting out of this is what I want, I like flail decently well as an attack.
Okay.
And mobile gear, I always want one to be online because I want my opponent to think about it. I very rarely want to attack with mobile gear. In fact, I would almost always prefer to attack with dive. So probably I would say that I'm the most willing of these cards to spin mobile gear as force, as long as I have one left.
You have one left, sure.
And then mech charge is like a bit like this one, where I'm like, this is a boost I really want to play, but if this is not the boost I'm playing this turn, then I'll pay it as force.
Okay. And the decision making can be that in the moment, that you're like, right now I have a better thing to do, so I'm going to do that with the thing that I would like to do later.
Yes, because every turn matters. Like I mentioned that I'm willing to take the pre-action, but it's not because I have down turns. It's because I need resources and I don't have a good way to get them.
Right.
Which means that no turn is a down turn. I go, all right, I'm preparing this turn and I know what it's costing me. It's a very real decision. And then in 2 turns, I'm going to play this. And whether I play this or this or this, like which thing I play and what I pay for it is an extremely important decision. I need to be building up to that.
Okay.
And then it's going to set me back in all likelihood for 2 more turns in return for me being in a strike context ahead for 2 more turns, where I go, yeah, I'm going to win this strike so hard that I can afford to be on the back foot resource wise after the strike for 2 extra turns.
Right. And you're, and those 2 extra turns are charging up for your next really scary strike.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I should probably talk about the green elephant in the room. This boost, in some form or another, is in every kit in the game.
Yep.
There's a version called Tech Hit in Season 6, Under Night. There's a version called Ukemi in Season 7, Guilty Gear. But everybody has the ability to discard an opponent boost from play.
Yes.
The vast majority of characters have 2 of these. There are a few characters with like special or ultra effects that are similar in nature, where they can clear a boost in some weird way.
But at least 2.
Yeah, at least 2. So you got 2 of these, they got 2 of these. Fair enough. Now let's play the rest of the game.
Right.
Like that's my attitude here, is that you will get stuff teched. That's okay. It's fine. Like don't commit your entire existence to it. Right? If you're at 3 life and you have 4 gauge, don't pay your 4 gauge to play a boost if they still have dive available.
Right.
Like that pushes even my boundaries of reason. Because you spent all your gauge and now you're just dead because they just teched it and you're like, oh, that was a bad idea. But if I have 1 gauge, 5 cards in hands, I might just throw 4 cards away from my hand to play the 5th card as a boost. And go, yeah, all right. They tech it, that's okay. It was something was going to get teched twice this game. Well, 4 times if you count the reshuffle.
Yeah, with the reshuffle.
I generally don't find games go that long. This character has a lot of damage.
Yeah, you hit really hard. You do not have a lot of life. You aren't keeping an overage of gauge to exceed with. So if you have 4 gauge of Tinker, you're like, sick, boost.
Almost always, yeah.
Yeah.
I might save like up to 2 or up to 3, 2 to 3. Like I'll save 2 so that I will hit and get the 3rd one, because I actually do like this ultra for ending games. So I will often play this ultra attached to this boost in basic mode, because that's a 1 to 5, 8/4 with ignore armor. Like it's pretty good.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I have in fact won the game by playing a bomb bounce from hands deliberately in basic mode to crush a focus and win the game.
Yep.
Just go, all right, I have a 6 power ignore armor at speed 2. That's all I need. Let's do it.
Yep.
And that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But yeah, so tech exists. It's going to make you sad. That's okay. Be happy the rest of the time.
Yeah, just do it again later when they've run out of techs, because
Yep.
Even as long as you have the force to do it, you have more boosts that are scary than they have techs to deal with them.
Absolutely.
Right.
Because I'm not even talking about normal boosts, where it's like, well, if you can win a strike by having a light in play or by having a defend in play, great, do that. If they decide to tech that then they do this, and then if they have a light out, then you can tech it, and you're kind of up on your boost score because you just have way more deadly boost than they have.
Right.
Like, not many people are going to beat you in boost quality.
Yeah.
Various people can play more of them or play them more efficiently. That's not that hard to do. You're not very efficient, but you're awesome.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
you are uh committing a lot of your resources to that boost game. They need to be committing as many resources to stopping your boost game, but they don't have as many resources to commit because they only have a couple copies of
Mhm.
dive. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. The other subtle benefit of this, by the way, is that the fewer cards you have in hand, the less vulnerable you are to reading or parry and effects like that.
Yep. Sure.
So I do not tend to get red as Synchronite. I don't tend to have enough cards for it to even be useful. Where I'm like, all right, I have 2 or 3 cards in my hands. You can reading me if you want to. If you don't reading me, then I kill you next turn.
Right.
So good luck,
So better
right?
guess. Yeah.
Yeah, guess well. Choose wisely.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So I'm looking through because this is kind of like a different format for a guide like this where we're not doing a kit breakdown really. I'm trying to think if there's anything that we haven't covered. So like actually surprisingly useful as like a projectile dodge
Yeah.
or as a
Well,
confirm.
I wanted to talk about this side of the line more detail. So let me do a bit more of the kit breakdown because I do want to talk about how you use these tools when you're not in Exceed mode.
Sure. Yeah, that
Because I
sounds
will
great.
play these cards not in Exceed mode, right?
Yeah.
I've talked a great deal about missiles because missiles is an incredible source of value. It's super useful. It does much things that are good for you. So
Yep.
I've talked enough about missiles. Let's set
Yep.
missiles aside. This card is a speed 4 attack at range 3 that beats sweep and focus. Basically, it beats anything that isn't on curve. Um, it has rocket fuel on it, so I'm reluctant to play it because if I miss, then I'm sad. You don't have to be sad if you hit, because the text that people usually don't read on within my reach is or gauge
Oh,
and or
okay.
gauge for no
Okay.
cost.
Awesome.
So you are totally fine hitting with one wrench toss and then boosting it later.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
yes, please, yeah, that text is important. Um, most people are going to play from hands. That's fine. Do that. It's not a bad idea. Um, but yeah, so like you can hit with this at range 3, and it's pretty safe against a lot of characters. It's going to beat most normals unless they respond with assaults.
Yep.
And then you can still play a rocket fuel later. So like, be aware that that's an option that you have, and it's decent. The attack is kind of garbage at like in terms of value, but you know, if they played a sweep, its value suddenly went way up because they didn't hit you with sweep.
Right.
I
Sure.
happen to love not getting hit by sweep.
Yeah, no, it's one of my
Uh,
favorite things.
it's really good.
Yep.
Good experience. Would recommend. Um, so this is expensive and therefore dangerous. You are paying a lot of force for a lot of things. You cannot afford to use this card really as a call out very often at all. Um, if you if your opponent's at the edge of the arena, you need power for this to even stun a sweep. So it's not that good of a call out, even for what it would be a call out for.
Sure.
Like this card's real janky if you're not in Exceed mode. If you're in Exceed mode, this gets real dumb.
Yep.
But if you are not exceeding, you want to pay this as force, you want to boost it. I would not recommend using this attack. The like exceptions to that are you manage to boost one and then also have something else in play. But you're usually taking a risk. Like if you have this in play, if you have rocket fuel in play,
Yeah.
then this might be an 8 power speed 5 on curve thing that destroys the opponent. But if you have rocket fuel in play, you probably have a lot of things
Yeah,
that are going to destroy the opponent.
it's a target-rich
So
environment among your deck that could destroy the opponent with rocket
yeah,
fuel.
and those things don't cost a force, and Drill Arm does.
Right.
Um, and we care an awful lot about our force.
Yeah.
So I will say this card is very valuable for one peculiar reason, or rather, I would say Tinker Knight loves a certain detail about this card. You can invalidate it when you wild swing it.
Oh, sure, it's a force spec. So
So
if
yes,
we're talking about all right, so I've got rocket fuel down, I don't really care what I'm hitting with because it's probably going to be great. I pulled drill arm. Well, all right, I pull another card. Oh, okay, cool. Dive, die.
yeah, there you go. Yeah,
Right.
so it's like, all right, Drill Arm is often not great, but that's okay because you never have to play it on purpose,
Yep.
and you never have to play it by accident either. So,
Yep.
like, it's nice that it does not pin you in an awkward situation.
Sure.
You know, because you are going to be wild swinging. Let's be real. Part of resource conservation in Exceed is knowing that you need to wild swing to save resources fairly often.
Yeah.
It is totally acceptable to do that on offense or on defense as Tinker Knight because you do not have enough resources to strike from hand every single strike.
Right. And if
Like,
you're committing so many resources to a strike that's going to deal, 8 damage without them able to do anything about it, and you get sort of if you trade down a little bit during some wild swing turns when you're caught without a setup or something, that's okay. you'll make it up
Yeah.
later.
Yep. Yeah, like
Okay.
you'll happily play defensive stuff from hand, like focus, sweep. I guess you can block. It's fine.
Right.
I'll forgive you. Uh, but it's also fine to wild swing if you don't have those things, and don't take it too hard if you lose a strike, because that means that you didn't spend a resource to lose from hand.
Yep.
Um, uh, remind me at the end of going through these to mention favorite range, by the way.
Yes.
All right. So I mentioned already, I like having this because I like having an EX of this to have an
Mhm.
extra speed 7 button, because it can catch a lot of people. What I mostly use this for is to get out of the corner. Even against a focus or a sweep, it will get me out of the corner. Like,
Yep.
I'm corner at range 1, I jump out. I will also duck under certain projectiles with it. So it's situationally useful in a lot of cases, but not really as a attack per se, so much as a speed 6 advance 2 button, right?
Yeah, you kind of mentioned this when you were talking about missiles as well, as being like, this is actually, you're thinking of it as part of your neutral,
Yeah,
where
exactly.
where
Yeah, like my most common turn 1 strike is missiles.
sure,
Like, I'm not going to hit you. I don't want to. I don't need
right,
to.
you're just
I need to
trying to
control the next strike.
set things up for the next strike. Meanwhile, this is your get out of the corner button, and you don't, you have made the calculated risk that if they play a thing that hits really hard, you're like, well, okay, but at least I got out of the corner.
Yeah. If you're playing a thing that hits really hard, I got out of the corner. If you're playing a thing that outspeeds me, I didn't get hit very hard.
Right,
So, like,
right, yeah,
eh.
loss conditions not so bad.
Yep. Like, yeah, that's reasonable.
Right.
So that's generally what I use Flail for. Mobile gear, as I mentioned, people respect, and people need to respect. So if people stop respecting it, then yeah, play it. Like, don't let this fall out of your mix-up entirely, where your opponent just assumes you'll never play mobile gear.
Right.
But this is a very unsafe card. It's almost guaranteed to hit. It's above curve at range 4.
Yep.
It's a great opener if you're playing to secure gauge at all costs.
Yep.
Where you'll jump in and poke them for a little bit damage. My problem is, then you probably eat a sweep.
Yeah. Sure.
And as we talked about, how not eating a sweep is a great and wonderful thing and a very good experience. Eating a sweep, would not recommend.
Yeah,
Thumbs down. Not a good experience.
Eating a sweep, terrible reviews on Yelp.
Yeah.
Just a bad service all around.
Yes. Overall reviews, negative.
Very negative, yes.
Very.
Yep.
So that's kind of my issue with mobile gear, is like, I'm not usually going to catch my opponent diving into me with mobile gear, which is the ideal use case, right? Is that they played on curve, you play above curve. Ha,
Sure.
gotcha.
Yeah.
That's not usually going to happen, because usually they respect mobile gear too much to do that.
Right.
And so I end up often at range 3 or less in situations where mobile gear only beats like spike or a really, really cheeky dive. And by the way, your opponent will never strike you with dive, with an asterisk on this, of course.
Right, because of how good tech is.
Yes. There's 2 asterisks, actually. The first asterisk is never say never, because if
Right.
they need to, they will.
They will.
The second asterisk is Season 6 accepted, because their tech hit is actually on block,
It's on
not
block.
on dive.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
So they will play dive,
They'll
and
play
then
dive
also
all
tech
day.
you.
Yes.
Yeah. Be aware of that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I will hold this as a threat. I will occasionally play it if I think my opponent's not respecting it, but I'm very, very reluctant to use it in general if I'm not in Exceed mode. If I'm in Exceed mode, I'm actually still reluctant to play this as is, but I will happily play it if I have this boost in play.
Okay.
Because it's now an Ignore Guard, speed 5, so above curve Ignore Guard.
Probably just win the strike.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh, and
But,
it's got 3 power.
hopefully I didn't get
so even against focus.
Yeah,
Cool.
like it if you actually manage to be at range 4 in Exceed mode, which is not usually going to last for very long because of how that whole dynamic shapes.
You're over here somehow.
Yeah, like if that actually happens, then you can have a pretty nice above curve Ignore Guard poke.
Okay.
And in all likelihood, the opponent will come in closer to you, and that buys you a turn to play some other boost.
Yep.
Not an attack that you want to play in basic mode pretty much ever.
Sure.
Super unsafe, very low value, costs tons of resources, has a great boost, and is 2 force. Like, tons and tons of reasons not to play this attack.
Yeah.
Luckily, you never have to play it on purpose. You never have to play it on accident.
Yep. You just validate it.
Yep. Beats block and focus. That is an actual use case.
Yep.
Like, be aware of it. It can attach to, in particular, rocket fuel, but to a lesser extent, turbocharger, and sometimes one of these other 2 that give it actual defenses.
Yep.
Like, there's use cases for that. It's still usually going to be like very unsafe, but it's also very punishing. So treat it as a big dumb mid speed that is very expensive, but an important part of your mix up. Like,
Sure.
if you have for example, no spikes, and they're going, okay, no spikes. There's no more ignore armor in that kit, and they think they're safe. Then show them
Right.
they're wrong.
Sure.
Right? That's what you do.
Yep.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Let me talk favorite ranges, and then I'm going to add one more note about the fabled third line.
Okay.
So favorite ranges. If this is in play, you have a ton of options based on what's left in your deck, but you probably want 2 to 5. 5 is kind of long, but 5 is still where sweep and not focus. Sorry, sweep and spike,
Yep.
and assault and dive are all live, so still very solid.
Yep.
And yeah, sweep in particular is 8 power, speed 4
is brutal. Yeah.
Dear Lord. And yeah, very, very, very silly. But yes, and then at 2, you can confirm almost anything from this boost. Like, you actually lose access to spike because of the advance effect, but you get access to virtually anything else because dive hits, cross hits, grasp hits, sweep hits, focus hits, assault hits.
Right.
All of your specials hit. Well, hold on, is that true? Yeah, that's true.
Yep. Hence the comment about wild swinging that you don't as long as it's not as long as it's not something that spike or block, you're fine. Yeah.
It's like which by the way, mulligan wise, obviously you want this card, and you probably want to look for spike, block, and to a lesser extent dive and grasp, which are your how do I make my wild swings more consistent things to mulligan for. But that's anyway. But yeah, so typically your ranges are going to be 1 to 3 because you play a lot of normals, and then if you have one of these boosts up and ready to go, you can extend that out to like 2 to 5, where you can throw threats your opponent can't contest, but they will come into you. And so expect your ranges to stick closely to the 1 to 3 paradigm most of the time.
Sure.
And that's generally fine because you have an extra sweep, so 1 is fine, and you have an above curve 4, so they will tend to come in a little bit closer.
Yeah.
And then you have boosts that make everything dumb at 3. At 2 and 3.
And so, and also also there's the fact that like you have enough additional range on your kit if you need it that it's pretty tough to zone you. So they're gonna try to box with you instead, and that's where you're comfortable anyway, because that's where the normals are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, people generally don't try to zone you. I mean, characters with a plethora of ranged options will. New 13, yes, but New 13 will fight everyone at range.
Yeah,
so go figure. That's the nature of it. Like, she is really, really good at range.
Yeah.
But most characters with like Ryu, for example, has Hadouken. Hadouken is a great projectile. Hadouken, whatever. I can't pronounce anything. He has a projectile. It's very good. And he'll be happy to hit you with it, but he's probably not going to go to great lengths to try to make Hadouken his game plan, because if something goes wrong one turn, then he might be eating something extremely stupid that beats his Hadouken, where you go, oh, actually, at range 5, I'm just going to hit you with Assault at speed 7. Like, oops. So, like, he's not really gunning for that. Obviously, he likes having the option, but yeah, like, most characters are not going to try to shift you to range, because if they give you range, they are probably giving you time to draw cards, which gives you time to play boosts, which gives you time to kill them. It's not a good plan for them. They would rather rush you down, knock out that 15 life, and just try to kill you as fast as possible so that they don't have to deal with either version of Exceed Mode Tinker.
Right.
Either the 35, 40 life version, or the, like, I have 8 life, but you're dead anyway version.
Yeah, but I still have all the stuff that Tinker can do, and you still have to deal with it version.
Yep.
Right.
All right, Fabled third line. Before I forget to mention this.
Yes.
This was something that came up in theory crafting, and that I think is still mostly true. Which is that there is kind of a point where these lines intersect, which is like right after you exceed, where they'll both be doing the same thing, which is you got a big dumb ultra, it's really good. Play it. You got a big dumb, corner mix up, that's really good. Hold it over your opponent's head. And or play it. And also, you can now spend your gauge freely.
Yep.
So play your boosts, play your amazing boosts, and then play your attacks that already have amazing boosts attached to them. And now you have basically 3 boosts, or 4 boost quality boosts attached to one attack, right? Because if you play Rocket Fuel and you're in Exceed mode and you play Drill Arm, you have constructed an Egyptian God card.
Yeah.
Right? You have a speed 6, power, I think 12. Let me do the math here. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Excuse me, 11. Only 11. It's fine. Totally balanced.
Yeah, that's not that's hardly stuns anything.
Yeah, on curve 11 is way more reasonable.
Yeah.
Although usually you'll play this when you're at range 1 and the opponent is cornered, which means that it's not on curve, but it has 3 guards, so it beats grasp anyway.
Right.
Because it has advance 2 and 3 guard and also extra range.
Yep. And if
But
they're in
yes,
the corner, it's like 13, or was that factored in with the?
no, that was with the corner. That was
with
4,
the
5,
corner.
6, 7, 8,
Gotcha.
9, 10, 11.
Gotcha.
So that's with corner. I'm assuming it's the follow up to mech charge.
Sure. You're still doing that line that you mentioned in the first line that you discussed.
Yes. Yeah. So like that's where the lines intersect, where it's like if you're forced to flip, there's going to be this window of time where they look exactly the same because the things they both want to do are the things that they can now afford to do, and they're really good.
Right.
It's like now both versions are like, okay, I can pay my gauges force. Let's do it. Right.
So this hybrid line is like trying to exceed with around, or rather, if they have to exceed, they're exceeding with around 3 gauge rather than 5.
Yeah. What I'm really describing is like the third line is actually just the endpoint of the first two, where things start to look like, oh, in exceed mode, both versions of Tinker are going to look very similar.
Right.
If you have the gauge to play your ultra, you'll play your ultra. If you have the force to play your boosts, you play your boosts, and then you'll play your dumb attacks with your dumb boosts.
Right.
And so you'll tend to play normals because they're good, and specials because they're dumb, and boosts whenever you can afford them. So like that's where both lines kind of look like the aggressive set play line, because that's how you're kind of maximizing the value of the output of your cards.
Right. And so when you are forced to exceed as Tinker, this is how you're playing.
Yeah. So it's typically if I'm forced to flip, I'm like, oh man, I'm forced to flip. I have 4 or 8 life because I typically did not have 3 or more gauge.
Right.
But I have 1 or 2 turns of I'm in exceed mode. I'm going to put a boost into play, and then I'm going to have an attack that you suddenly realize you cannot deal with.
Right.
Where I go, oh, now even mobile gear, dinky little mobile gear, 3 power is actually 7 power, and it's speed 7.
Yeah.
Like, and it hits. Yes.
Yep.
Right.
It hits. I
think it might not hit range 8.
It hits this board over here, where other people are playing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me check real quick. Hold on. So we're in exceed mode, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. No, it hits the full board. Yep. It hits the full board. Okay. But yeah. So like if you're like, oh man, I'm not drawing my rocket fuel. I'm struggling. I didn't draw this boost either. Like I'm sad because I wanted to play this line and I just didn't get to because I didn't draw the cards. Because as a note, that one flaw or caveat, I guess, about the characters that start with 15 life is that they lack the necessary cushion to consistently see all the cards in their deck if their opponent is playing sufficiently aggressively.
Oh, sure.
Right. So it's actually possible for you to be forced into your late game before you're ready. Whereas with most characters, you can change cards more aggressively. You can gun for gauge with things like block or EX attacks. Like you can do things that ensure that you can get to your game plan because the engine lets you be that consistent.
Right,
with only 15 life,
a longer game. Yeah.
Yes, with only 15 life, you can actually find that gets wiped out a little too fast, and you might actually not have the ability to go through and see all your cards as fast as you want to, even if you're being very aggressive about digging for cards, about changing cards when you need to, etc., etc.
Right.
If that's the case, don't be alarmed. Accept that you're going to exceed with maybe 1 to 3 gauge, even if you're playing the aggressive line, because when you get these, they'll be that much better.
Sure.
Like you can play them, and even though it would have been nice for them to have 1 U neutral, so that you didn't even have to exceed to begin with, you're still going to get immense value. You don't have within my reach anymore. That's a little sad, but you have a perfectly good 2. You have a perfectly good 2 force, and so ditch it as 2 force, and that's half of a boost right there.
Right. And so do you tend to dig like crazy and change cards for your really important boosts like rocket fuel?
Not exactly. What I tend to do is, if my hand has something that I'm okay with responding to my opponent with, well, I should put it this way. If my hand lacks a boost that I'm building for, and also lacks a thing that I'm willing to respond to my opponent with, then I'm going to change cards.
Whoa. Oh man, we're back. Sorry about that, everybody. My power went out. Good times over here at the Gearface household. D, you were talking about when to change cards. Please continue with your thought now that it's almost an hour and a half later.
Certainly. Okay, so to the best of my recollection, yeah, I was describing how like even so my usual playstyle for most characters involves or expects to change cards multiple times per game because I'm digging relatively aggressively, and that's not the case even when I'm running the more aggressive Tinker line, where I'm trying to not just hunker down and hoard my 5 gauge, but win neutral, win strikes consistently, stay ahead of things.
Right.
And in this, I don't actually change cards all that often because I have a lot of ways to do various things. So the situation in which I'll change cards is when I don't have these any either of the following in hand. A boost that I'm building up towards, where I need to gain resources. So that would be, any of our number of amazing boosts that we've already talked about at length.
Right.
But like a boost that I know that I want to play. And of course, if I have a boost I want to play and I already can afford it, or I have this, then that's probably already happening.
Right.
It's like I don't have a boost in hand that I'm ready to play, or even that I'm about to play, and I need to build up resources. Because of course, change cards does not actually gain you very many resources. It's more about changing your resources, right? Prepare
Yeah.
is the raw gain resources. So,
Sure.
at least when I'm talking about changing cards from hands, which in this case, when I care about force, it works the same.
Sure.
So, if I don't have a thing in hand, a boost in hand specifically that I'm building to is one of these big flashy, I'm going to win the strike boosts. And also, I don't have something that I know that I can play if my opponent strikes. And that's so that kind of consideration is maybe more narrow than it sounds. So if we're at range 3 or something, and I'm like, all right, I've got in my hands sweep, spike, assault, right?
Right.
Cool. If my opponent strikes, I'm going to wild swing. I'm not responding with any of those.
Okay.
Unless they have a very specific mid speed that I really, really need to cover, then maybe I'll play assault. But like, I'm not going to burn those on this strike that my opponent decided they were ready to initiate under their circumstances. Like they've decided that they're in a good position. I'm going to agree with them. Wild swing, keep my hands. That's just baseline exceed. Unless I have the read, unless I know for sure, like, oh, I need to cover this, I need to filter this. So that's a situation where I have a perfectly good set of options I could respond with, but I don't have a thing that I know I'm playing in response. Right? If I'm looking at my hands and I'm going, when my opponent strikes,
That doesn't mean
so I'm
that you
trying
know
to
for
draw a
sure.
distinction between you have viable options you could use to respond when your opponent strikes, and sometimes you will decide to play one of them because you're trying to filter something or cover the mix-up, as opposed to you are rock solid, it's your turn, and you know that when your opponent strikes, or if your opponent strikes their next turn, you know what you're responding with. You already know that. Right? You have decided and you've got a good reason for it, you know that's correct. So it's like, I'm at range 4, my opponent strikes, I know that I'm playing probably mobile gear or missiles, or I could block, I guess. It's allowed. It's not even that bad when you're Tinker Knight because it's still often a better delta than you'll get off a lot of characters. But anyway.
Sure.
But yeah, it's like I need to know what I'm responding with. So when I say I don't have a thing in hand that I'm comfortable responding with, as like one of the reasons that I'll ditch my hands to look for better hands, I mean like that's actually more common than it sounds.
Right.
What's uncommon is I don't have a boost in building toward.
Right.
So I'm fairly often in a situation where I'm like, man, I'm looking at this hand and I've got a lot of reasonable things, but if my opponent has decided that they're willing to launch to a strike on their turn, I'm not going to gamble on this stuff. I'm going to hold my resources so that I can play and win the strike that I'm deciding the circumstances of later.
Right.
And in that circumstance, that's okay, I don't really have a card I'm playing. So if I don't have a boost in building toward, then I need to change cards.
Right. I gotcha. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, like the contents of your hand leaving your hand, it versus it coming from gauge, for example. What Tinker Knight kind of cares about seems to be mostly just raw force. So like I'm wondering how much it matters whether you're changing cards from hands or changing cards from gauge, for example.
Yeah, and the answer is not all that much. With this important caveat, you can have theoretically, I usually won't, but you can have 7 cards in hands and then still have more force because you have gauge.
Oh, true.
Right. So
Yep.
gauge is your force bank.
Right.
And I definitely do that with Tinker Knight. The thing is that with Tinker Knight, I'm going to be burning out enough force that I'm usually not usually. Yeah, gauge is my force bank, I usually find that with Synchronite, it's not that it's my extra force bank, it's that that's where I have any force at all because I have so little left in hands. You know, my hand is probably less than 4 cards
Sure. Okay.
um, half the time because I'm building and then I'm boosting, and there's not a lot of downtime because no turn is actually downtime because every turn your opponent gets, they'll use against you.
Right. Is it possible to uh play a defensive set play style thing? Like if I put up rocket fuel past my turn to my opponent, can I try to mitigate their striking into me and try to get a
Yeah,
turn that way? Or is
you
that
can
is that just
try.
not, it just doesn't work
the
with
the
against
It
good
doesn't work as
opponents?
well. It doesn't work as well because if you're trying to play defensively, you're trying to minimize your risk and minimize your losses, and you're not going to you're going to be one turn behind because you need to be confident in what you're playing from hand. You're never going to throw just a wild swing at something if you have this much committed to it. You're not going to commit, for force in this card and say, yeah, I'm wild swinging because statistically my options are still perfectly good.
Right.
You're going to say, no, I did this because I was sure that I needed to do this to
Right.
make my whatever cross, absurdly safe.
Right.
So that means that need to respond from hand or to set from hand means that you're kind of you're one half to one turns behind somebody who's willing to strike from deck even in those situations,
Right.
and that's already like a slight disadvantage. But also, if the opponent is playing defensively and trying to mitigate these threats, um, then you playing defensively and then playing defensively means you'll actually burn out your payouts for less value over the long term
Right.
than is acceptable,
Right.
right?
And
It's like,
that is that one of the ways that you actually can beat Tinker is you make his payouts on less valuable things than he would like.
yeah, if you can get him to waste them, great. I usually think that the way to beat Tinker is to rush him down in those in between times because I've described a rhythm of you're going to build some resources, you're going to play a big boost, and you're going to win the strike.
Right.
Uh, and so my general pattern of playing against Tinker, if he's doing that kind of thing, which most Tinkers will do at least twice because they just do this, and that's
Sure.
their, so they don't actually spend much time building up. But they do this, they'll win that next strike, or I'll tech it. But when they do win that strike, I go, okay, they're winning that strike, and I'm winning the next one. So I let him have it, but I make sure that whatever I'm losing to or whatever board state we're in, I'm going, okay, the thing that he's doing, it's gonna be inconvenient for me. Maybe I have to block something and it's like a 9 power attack or something stupid. Maybe I can't block this and I have to call the mix up in some awkward way or I just eat it. But whatever it is, I'm gonna assume that he wins the strike, and then what I'm gonna try to do is come back hard and win the next strike. And then ideally the strike after that, because his attacks poor power values, very bad at trading, pretty flimsy. Like you can kind of just beat him up
Right.
if he's not actually getting ahead of things and staying out of your way.
Right.
Uh, and super reliance on normals. And
So
if you manage to go trading evenly or trading up on him consistently, which is what you'll usually do by doing this, like if you rush him down, then you'll find that you're in exceed, like he's in exceed mode, and it might look like he has about the same amount of life as you, but his is going to go a bit faster.
go down a lot faster, right? So it actually is
Mm.
kind of similar way back when you were telling me about Akuma. Like the thing that you told me was basically like, yeah, he's going to hit you for 8 a couple times, and
Mm-hmm.
you just kind of got to live with that and beat him
Yeah,
when he's not hitting you for 8. Like
yeah.
everything Tinker does takes a little bit of time. You need to push on him when he's not setting up. Tinker Knight needs to make those setup turns as clean and as safe as possible to actually get them off without getting beaten up. It sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's not even just how safe and how clean; it's how much raw value he's getting.
Sure.
So
Sure. Sure.
grasp and cross are things that he needs to have in his mix-up, but it's only 3 printed power, and it's an attack that he could often land without a boost on it.
Right.
Much happier to throw a sweep, a spike, a dive, something with 5 or greater printed
Yep.
power, where these numbers are making a strike that he wins cleanly for 8 to 10 instead of a strike that he wins cleanly for 5.
For 5, totally. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh, uh, because your opponent is going to be attempting to not give you very many of those strikes.
right,
So make them
right.
count. Okay,
Make him count.
that works.
Hmm.
All right. So I can't look at our time anymore because this is a separate recording.
Mhm.
is there anything else that you wanted to cover specifically about Tinker Knight? I have a couple of questions left, but
Well,
wanted to give you the floor first.
the answer is no. I had a idea, which was if we haven't done something like this yet in the other recordings we've done, but if I could pull some test draws and just show you how I parse every hands with Tinker, if that'd
Yes,
be interesting, I could do
that'd be
that.
awesome. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, let's plan on doing that in a second. But let's hear your questions first.
Yeah, so the two questions that I had, number one was we sort of went through some of the use cases for these boosts, and in many cases the use cases for the boost is like kind of anything but anything good, really. Especially this one where like it sort of works on anything. Um same with turbocharger. The one that and I saw force feedback being very good on dive. The one that I didn't hear a ton of use case for was armor plating, and the fact that you like it as an attack, does that mean that you don't tend to be building toward that boost explicitly?
Yeah, seldom. This is my second least common boost.
Okay.
Where the least common is this one, arcing
And
projectiles.
conveniently, these are the two attacks you like the most to just play raw.
hmm
Yep.
That's correct.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah, I do with armor plating. It's generally going to be on an assault or a grasp.
Right.
Um, like grasp if I'm really doing something silly with hit effects, especially if I think my opponent's going to play a sweep and they're cornered. It's
Right.
like if they're in the corner and you have this in play, they're probably not thinking about the fact that you can pull and then push and beat their sweep.
Right.
Um, they also are likely, very, very likely to play a focus. Like somebody sees this, they're like, okay, I'll just play a focus, and you can use that to your advantage either just by saying, sure, I have 3 armor, I'm going to trade up against your focus,
Right.
or by doing something like playing across, you know, do something that's useful against their focus in some other way.
Sure. That makes
Uh,
sense.
but yeah, but
Um,
usually this pairs with assault or grasp in my experience.
okay. And I mean, given what you were talking about, making sure that all of your stuff is as high value as possible, uh, eh, you know, getting armor for the delta is nice, but if what I'm looking for is making my sweeps unreasonable, that's a lot of force that I'm putting onto a grasper and assault.
Yeah, yeah. This the reason I like it on grasp and assault is because that's when I can make a thing that wins the strike clean.
Right.
Because I
Right.
would prefer not to pay all of that to like trade not that well. It's like, well, 3 armor is nice if I have to trade.
Right.
If this is the thing that's keeping me alive, okay, sure, fine, I'll do it.
Right.
But I would much rather say, actually, if I call the mix up, then you just lose. You take 7+ damage. You can't do anything about it.
Right.
And this does not do that.
Yep. Works for me. Okay. And then the other question I had was about his like so we've discussed like normals are generally your attacks.
hmm
Uh but you also mentioned way at the beginning of this lesson that he has pretty good neutral. And in my
hmm
head, neutral is frequently done through the season 1 through 5 normal boosts.
Correct.
So is he still playing defend and fierce and light as needed and not just playing the attacks, or is it more that he's really gunning for these being his boosts?
But yeah, I heard what you're saying, which was, you know, does he still play light fierce defense? Does he still run kind of the
Yeah.
defensive set play out of the season 1 through 5 normal boosts?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes, absolutely, because he has a natural advantage in that the opponent is very unlikely to tech any of those.
Mhm.
And if he starts a boost war with one of his really, really dumb boosts, and they're already out of techs, then one of their normal boosts is not going to compete,
Right.
right? Like he can win boost wars as long as he's choosing how he engages in them.
Right.
Um, so he leads with light, and the opponent's like, all right, well, I can't tech that because then I'm out of tech. So I guess I'll boost light. And he's like, oh, okay, well. But yes, so they tech your big dumb boost, and you go, well, that's okay. I'm not happy about it, but I knew it was going to happen.
Yeah.
It's still my turn, and I still have a tech, and I can tech your light, and then you don't have a tech against my light, right?
Right.
Like I'm still one turn up, and I'm still one tech up in the overall long term boost war.
Okay.
So because it's like who has boost quality that's going to rival yours?
Right.
There's virtually nobody like boost for boost. I mean, of course, you don't play a boost every turn. Other people are going to spend 2 turns playing 2 boosts that add up to your 1 boost.
Right.
But the fact that you're up a turn is a huge deal.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. So in the sort of neutral paradigm of trying to uh get to where you're trying to get to quickly, you're moving real fast, but you're spending a lot of resources doing it. That
Yeah.
makes sense.
And you're totally fine playing normals, attacks, or boosts. You can play normal exceed. You work just fine. You don't have there's nothing that makes you worse at playing normal exceed than anybody else.
Right.
It's just that you can't be only doing that because then on average you'll have some trouble when half the game is gone and you're down to like 12 life versus 20.
Yep. Absolutely. Okay, cool. So those are my questions. And then if you want to do the
Cool.
take a
Yeah,
look at a
let's
hand
do
or
some hand
two,
sampling
I'd love to see.
and just talk through that. So
Here,
all right. Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry.
all good.
Okay. All right.
Grasp,
Well, right off the
bomb
bat, we have
bounce,
within my
sweep,
reach.
drill arm, dive. Yep. Okay.
So like, all right, cool. I have within my reach. Do I have? Yep. I've got a thing to play with within my reach. Great. Do I need any of these? No. Well, fine. This is force, or this is mulligan, or this is neutral, right?
Yep.
Which this is a really lovely opening set of cards here. If this was my actual opening hands, I would pitch the grasp and the sweep because I don't need them right now.
Okay.
I would expect to boost this with this on turn 1.
Mhm.
And then I want to have a dive as a strike that I can threaten. So if they're like, I don't believe you really have a card that's good with this, I'm like, okay, sure. Here's an 8
Right.
power dive. Like,
Right.
that's fine.
Right. And when the turn came back to you and they didn't do anything about your boost, would you just send it? You just play the dive?
Then I stack another boost on it, or then I wild swing, but it depends a bit.
Okay.
The other thing I like about dive, which actually I might keep the grasp sometimes, but I probably wouldn't. Anyway, the other thing I like about dive grasp is this is in the set of cards that will often make your wild swings more consistent to not have in your deck.
Right.
But that's a general exceed strategy thing. Is that block, dive, grasp are the 3 cards that you want to like pay the most attention to where they are if you're specifically counting against wild swings.
Right. And usually for wild swinging at like ranges 2 and 3, because otherwise
Exactly. Yeah.
Spike is in there too.
Yeah, Spike is if you're a range 1 character,
Right.
which you are not.
Right.
As Tinker Knight.
Yep.
But yeah, so like I have within my reach and I have a boost to play with it. These are the only 2 cards I really need. Which of these 3 cards I keep or throw away or just are ready to spin its force is whatever.
Right.
And
so in this hand, you have the ability to play your boost turn 1. If you didn't have this, and this was some other card instead, this would be your whole hand to play this boost, right?
There you go. I replaced it.
Yeah, so. Perfect. So you spend all 4 of these and you put this boost down, you have an empty hand at that point.
Yeah. Turn 1 here, I would be very likely to either oh man, gotta think about it. So thing is, if it depends on what my opponent's kit is shaped like. If they have a projectile, then I am just gonna boost this. Yeah. Pitch the hand. All right, let's go. If they don't have a projectile in their kit, and by projectile I mean an attack that hits in opening positions and does not move them closer.
Yep.
If they don't have such a card, I would probably boost the Fierce.
Okay.
Because if they strike, then they're throwing a mix-up of playing block, which I beat with dive, because I have a bunch of damage and move closer.
Yep.
Or they're dive-like, in which case I beat it with sweep.
Yep.
So it's like I have actually a pretty solid mix-up, and I want to be the one who's establishing the terms under which we're having our boost war. So I would, on some characters, I would open with Fierce. A lot of characters have access to projectiles, and that's not really reliable.
Sure.
In which case I would pitch the hand and put this into play and say, all right, look me in the eye and tell me you don't believe anything in my deck hits.
Right.
Because I just threw away a block and a grasp, which are 2 of the things that whiff.
Yeah.
Off this.
Yeah. So presumably something else.
Yep.
Yeah. Unless you're really unlucky and they got to bank on that.
Yeah. Caveat, by the way, if you're running the other line, you look at this hand and you say, I have a block.
Yep.
Score. I have a light and a dive. All right. Like that means that if I want to, I can turn 1 light and then have a speed 6 dive that's going to confirm some gauge. Yep. And I have a block if I need to at any point. Keep those 3 moldies. So you actually keep like almost the opposite.
Yep. That's why they're different lines.
Yep. They're very different attitudes toward how you're evaluating your cards.
Yep.
Let's pick up another hand.
Sure. And if this only, like, we're having this conversation beyond just opening positions, right? Like we're talking about this, if you had this hand throughout the game too. Yeah.
When I say mull right now, I'm talking like it's your opening hands. But anytime later in the game you have this hand, you go mentally mark those cards as your force. Like that's That's how I would treat it, as like you're not mulling them because you're late in the game, but you're saying these are expendable,
Yeah, be good to
right?
ditch them if you need to.
Yeah. So like I look at this hands and I go, hey, look, I have a perfectly good 4 force and a boost. Done.
Okay.
That's a play.
Okay. So and this is the boost that you really want to be building towards. We got
Yep.
normal missiles, which you like
I
as
like
a
as an attack.
defensive option, but not that
Yep.
much.
And I like focus as an attack. These are perfectly good attacks.
Yep.
But I can win 2 strikes at once with this boost, so I'll ditch
Yep.
those and play this.
Yep.
Like,
And it,
and I
and
keep
it,
and I keep just keep the sand.
and again, if you dump everything, this is in play. You have an empty hand. You're okay wild swinging with this.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because I'm gonna see one card off the top of my deck and
Yep.
go, all right, does this work with it?
Yep.
Yeah, it's fine. Like, if it depending on my card counting, I might say, yeah, I'll just play the missiles and still have a good strike and
Right.
still actually beat sweep at range 4 because I advanced 2 and then push 2 with an after effect.
Right.
Or I might wild swing if I think my wild swing is good because statistically it's going to be. Oh look, speed 5 spike for 7 damage. Yeah.
Yep. And then you'd
Uh,
spend the next couple of turns preparing if you needed to.
yes, drawing back up. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, I don't want to do a million of these, but I do want to do one that's going to be probably a little harder or more interesting, which is you don't have a hands of 5 cards.
Sure.
You've got a hand of 3 cards, and you start to look at harder decisions. Where you go, okay, well, depending on what position you're in, if you're at ranges 1 to 3, you probably want to keep this cross just for its value as a strike.
Yep.
As like, so actually, this is a situation where I would go, I've mentally decided this is what I'm responding with my opponent's strikes.
Mhm.
So check. Having that decided, do I have a boost that I'm building toward? In this case, yes.
Yep.
I actually could build toward either of these. I'd be happy with this one, but if we're at close range, I might actually want this one. Depends on the situation. So I'm okay. If I have, let's see, perfect. 2 way less exciting cards. There you go. Right. So if this is my hand, I'm going to go, all right, if my opponent strikes, I respond with probably EX cross.
Yep.
That might not be better than responding with 1 cross, but I'm addicted to EXs.
It's the
Anyway,
rebel
I'm
inside
responding
you.
with at least 1 cross, which means that these other cards are fodder.
Okay.
And so if I have a bunch of gauge, I'm going to change cards aggressively, look for something else. If I am reasonably confident that doing this is not going to get me badly hurt, then I will just prepare and say, all right, I'm biding my time. When you
Right.
strike, I respond with this, and then I see what my play is the next turn.
Right. So you've got every element on your checklist. You've got some kind of response, and you've got thing you're building to. It's time to start building resources.
Yep. Yeah, well, it's not even every, it's any, right? So the hands that I don't want to see is a hand that's like oh, I don't know. A hand like this, which is a perfectly playable exceed hand.
Sure.
But it's not a hand that makes me go unless I'm really devoted to saying, yeah, I know they're going to play a thing that loses to grasp at range 1 or a thing that loses to dive at range 3.
Right.
Or range 1 for that matter, actually, or range 2, whatever. Anyway, unless I have the read and I'm like, yeah, I know I'm responding with this, I'm looking at this hand and going like, none of it. Don't want any of it.
Right.
And that's where I do either a CC3 or I go, if they strike, I'm wild swinging, which means this turn I prepare. And then if I still don't have a 4 force boost, and then I'll have 4 force to spin on it,
Yep.
then next turn I CC5.
Okay.
Like,
Yep.
CC is change cards. I don't know if I ever stated that explicitly. Sorry.
Yep. No,
Jargon.
that works. And so okay, it's one or the other or both. You've got a booster building to. You are
Yeah. Like, I drew a bunch of good hands in our samples. I was hoping to get worse ones, right? But I'm
right.
like, yeah, I've got a bunch of like, I respond with this, and I'm building toward this. This is perfect. This is all I need.
Easy. Yep. So you can just and unfortunately, obviously, of course, it always happens like this. You'd love to have those hands during an actual game, and this is the kind of
Mhm.
hand you get during an actual game when you're not
Yep.
demonstrating it to me.
Yeah. Well, the thing that you didn't see, except in the very first hand, was within my reach, right?
Right.
And when that comes out, it is kind of like you bought a free extra turn for yourself because instead of having to spend 4, you spent 2.
Yeah.
And it was 1 card instead of
Yep.
2 actual cards.
Yep. Okay. When I said a few minutes ago the thing about like the sort of 2 axes on which you're getting ahead, either resources or time. In Tinker Knight's case, sometimes they're fungible because
Yeah. One converts into the other.
Yeah, when you have something that's worth more resources, you have to spend less time building
Exactly. Yeah.
it. Okay.
That's kind of that's why it's 3 Akuma stacked on top of each other. Is you go, I'm just gonna spend 3 times as many cards to play 3 times as many boosts, but it's all printed on one card,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's just you're
Okay.
doing it all at once. So
Okay.
you're compressing by spending a bunch of resources to say, here, I'm playing 3 boosts at once, essentially, because of how insane these are.
Sure.
And then you have, but the thing that Tinker does not have, this is a very important weakness, and it's why I think if you're fighting against him, you should rush him down, is a way to convert in the other direction, right? The only thing he can do to turn, awesome stuff into time is, or sorry, let me say that the other way around. The only way for him to not spend extra time drawing cards by preparing is for him to change cards,
Yeah.
converting out Gauge or converting out Ultras, which are resources he does not want to spend that way. He would much rather spend them winning strikes.
Yeah.
Uh, so like he doesn't have he would actually love to have spend 5 life to draw 5 cards. Be a
Sure.
really, really good boost for him. Be fantastic. Because that buys him essentially another strike that he wins, because that's,
That's
4
a
force
boost.
in a boost.
Yep.
Like that's a boost.
And he's going to win by more than 5.
Almost certainly.
Yeah.
And even if he only deals 5, it's 5 clean, right?
Yep.
Like, that's, keep in mind that when you're engaging in this kind of boost war, you're not thinking, you usually don't want to be thinking about deltas, because your delta is, I won the strike cleanly.
Yeah.
Like, my opponent can play a sweep or a grasp, and in most cases, I'm still clubbing them for 5+.
Right.
And so, my numbers look a little better than they really are. You want to be careful doing that too often, though, because if you're relying on that and they're playing blocks and focuses and things, and you're only chipping for 5,
Right.
like,
Now
you might not be
suddenly
getting as much value as you want.
you're trading and you have a lower life total than the opponent, and things are going to go bad for you.
Yeah, like that
Yeah.
that can be an issue over time. So
Yeah.
you still want to have your bigger payouts in there.
Right.
But yeah.
So what
Like,
happens if you have a hand that is too good? Like you've got 2 or 3 boosts that are worth building towards. 2 of them just become force.
okay. Well, maybe not. Okay, not that kind of too good. Okay, but like this. Did we have a? Yeah, we did. So like this kind of hand,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
this, like these
Yeah,
3. It's
exactly.
like, oh man. And then I like prepare, and I hit, I don't know, the other wrench toss
Right.
and like missiles.
Right.
I'm like, good, a hand with nothing that I actually want to spend. Yeah, so let's look at this hand. All right. So I have 1 card with a boost that I don't want to play, but an attack I do want to play. And I've got 4 cards with attacks I don't want to play, but with boosts I do want to play.
Yep.
So yes, I've got 4 boosts I want and 1 attack I want, and I prefer the inverse. I prefer to have 4 things I can pitch on 1 boost,
Sure.
right? And say, like, I'm not losing access to these boosts, I'm losing access to these attacks, and that's fine. I've got a lot of attacks. Yeah. Yeah, so this is an unpleasant hand to look at and go, yeah, I've got to make decisions now. This is where I would spend Gauge, right? If I have any Gauge, that's where my force is coming from first on a hand like this, and I'm going to end up playing one of these, ideally. Yep. I will also consider the possibility of like just trying to land this attack as an attack, because remember, within your reach does play from Gauge. Like, that is an option I will have later if I land the attack.
Yep.
So that can be, I talked about it as a force bank, but it can actually also be a boost bank. Very, very rarely. You get to do it a couple times per game.
In specific circumstances, yeah.
Yep. So it's like, yeah, it's a boost bank, specifically for within your reach, and not very often, but that's an option. And at range 3, this is like an acceptable thing that you can play. Very, very, very cheeky at ranges 1 and 2, but with defend up, I might do that. Right.
Yeah.
I don't have that right now, but yeah. So looking at this exact hand of 5 cards, if we're at range 1, I probably just play like strike, just play missiles, and then push to range 3, where I have a range toss I can play later, and if they don't move back in, like, well, yeah, it'll depend on where the corner is, right? There's too many considerations here, but at range 1, I'd strike with missiles and say, I have a bunch of stuff, but I need resources. Missiles is an attack that lets me do something to reposition them, either pushing them toward the wall or pushing them away, or doing whatever. And it will go to my Gauge, which is a force that will stay. So it's like I'm not losing a force by striking. It will end up in my Gauge pretty reliably.
Right.
I would not strike with drill arm, not even EX drill arm, not even if 2 at the edge of the arena. It's just way too expensive. Like I can't afford to burn out anything else from this hand to do that. If I'm within range of lethal, if I'm about to die, then I pitch 4 to play 1.
And
Like if I'm at 6 life
you
or
just
less,
pick the best one for the circumstance.
it's that one. That one.
Yep.
Like there are cases in which turbocharge is better because it's +3 power instead of +2. That's
Sure.
the big difference.
Yep.
There are some cases in which this range is better than this before advance, although usually the thing that makes turbocharger better is the power.
Yeah.
Because +2, this is 2 effective range.
Yeah. 2 effective range
yeah.
and 2 effective speed, which is a lot. But
Yes.
yeah, so the +3 power is the standout here.
That is the thing that makes me go, if I need this +3 power, then I play the turbocharger. Otherwise, I'm probably paying these 4 to play rocket fuel, and it's excruciating, and I hate it.
Sure.
And then I'm probably reshuffling after the next strike,
Okay.
because they've gone. All these are gone. I need them back.
Just get all your stuff back, and that is when Tinker Knight reshuffles, and it's going to be manual if it happens at all, because your game isn't lasting long enough for you to go through your whole
at least the aggressive line, yes. The
Right.
Aggressive Setplay Tinker Knight is going to reshuffle when his cool stuff is gone and he needs it back. But yeah, I often don't need to. Like I often don't end up doing that because I'm spending a lot of turns drawing cards, and then I'm spending a lot of cards playing things, and so I'm going through my deck, and a lot of life is trading.
Right.
So like, I don't usually find that I run out of these before the game is over.
Sure.
But if I was in this situation, I'm like, okay, I'm at 6 life. This is my hands. Yeah, I would play this and say, well, I'll win the strike instead of losing the game.
Right.
Um,
But in other situations, you would be a little bit more cautious and maybe play some Exceed to get some gauge
Yeah.
to get stuff in other ways.
I would play a little
than...
Exceed. I would try to shove my opponent around with missiles. I would probably wild swing in defense if I had to, if they struck, and then I would look at how at some point I'd probably have to spend an off turn preparing and just buying 2 extra cards, which are force that I can throw on something.
Yep.
Because I'm willing to blow out this hand and say, like, I have nothing left except for one of these later.
Yeah.
But I'm very reluctant to say I'm blowing out this hand and I have neither of those for later.
Yeah. And
so
I
like
mean,
any 2 other cards makes me go, all right, now I can spend 4 and still have this.
Right. And the conversation that we just had about reshuffle, there's another side to that where, yeah, all right, you tend to go through the game without seeing all of your cards, without having access to all of them because the games don't go long enough. That also means that you don't need every single boost in your kit to kill your opponent.
Oh yeah, no, he's got way too much power for that.
Yeah, so at some point during this game when you have a hand like this, you're like, I don't want to lose this, 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 but really, I need to hit him 3 more times in this game. This could be 2 of them in this hand.
Yeah.
And the other one could be going towards one of those 2.
Yeah, the other one could be, the last hit could be focus, light, sweep, or light spike or light dive or sweep, or like, or EX assaults. Like you can get extra damage in by playing Exceed.
Yeah.
That makes a difference.
I feel like Tinker really manifests my sort of like new player instinct to be very precious with cards and very precious with force, and I got to get over that. And that's
if you're running the aggressive line.
Exactly.
Like I wanted to talk a lot about the aggressive line because like for various reasons related to, it's my favorite. It's the one that I started with when I picked him up. It made his costs change because it was really, really strong.
It was too good.
But also because I think it's absolutely counterintuitive to what most people do when they pick up this character.
Yeah.
Like most people are going to say, I am obviously not paying any of these costs.
Right.
I'm going to build my 5 gauge and I'm going to flip. And that does work, and there's nothing wrong with it. But I want people who think that that's the only way to play the character know that it's not.
Sure.
Right. And I'm like, yeah, if you thought that Tinker was boring because you thought that was the only way to play him, be aware, there's a way more exciting way.
Yes. And
because my Tinker games do not look boring.
Yeah, and if you're not aware, then play D's Tinker and he'll make you aware very quickly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome. All right. And then the only other thing that I wanted to ask about would have been counterplay, and we already sort of talked about rushing down Tinker. Is there any other notable weaknesses that he has that Tinker players should be aware of to try to mitigate?
So experienced players who know the matchup, you're gonna see parries and you're gonna see Specifically, you're going to see this card get parried and this card get parried.
Yep, makes sense.
And in those cases, parry can be an extra tech, and that is dangerous, right? So the idea is that they teched this boost, and then they parried this boost,
Oh
and so
yeah,
now you're actually down. You know, you're free and your actual copy, and so you only have one of these left, and you have only one of these left.
right. Parry is like
Uh,
a preemptive tech in this case.
yeah,
You do it before he
yeah,
actually lands on the field.
yeah. Like they'll usually parry within my reach because within my reach saves you 1.5 turns of drawing cards, give or
Right.
take.
Right.
Um, but they will sometimes parry for wrench toss to get the usually scariest and usually highest value of his nonsense boosts out of the way.
Right.
Um,
And I guess I mean if they parry wrench toss and you have within my reach in your hand, and then you look at, you know, a turbocharger or force feedback, and you're like, well, okay, I guess I'll only play this amazing boost instead.
yeah.
And so the
Then
thing that
then the
lets you
reason
play
you're
it is more
sad,
powerful
yeah. Then the reason that you're sad is because after you win that strike or after they tech that boost, you don't then also have
right
rocket fuel to play the next strike.
for later, yeah, because
And that can
that's
be a
how good
problem
it
long
is.
term. Because
Yeah, definitely.
if they're going, all right, I know how to mitigate his biggest payouts. I'm going to prevent him from having over the long term consistent access to all these done stats. Then they can shore themselves up against this one payout. Like, our opening positions, you boost this, they can cross out.
Yep.
Like if they initiate, then their cross leaves and you
Yep.
are not hitting them.
And that
Um,
is backbreaking for you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like I think a dive can hit, but dive is also unsafe if they initiate, like very unsafe if they initiate actually.
Yeah.
I have to do the table math to actually think about that. But yeah, so that can be an issue and it's gonna happen. That's like if your opponent doesn't have parry, they might have reading, they might have let's see, scramble has parry. So yeah, so just season 6 doesn't have parry, right? Okay. Yeah,
Correct.
if they don't have parry, that's less of a concern. They're still going to be spending their block on getting rid of a boost, but the other way because their block has tech hit.
Yeah.
Um, they will tend to play readings on you. If you're playing the aggressive version, you don't need to worry about it very much because you're never going to have a hand, right?
Right.
You're gonna have
They
like
want to
5 or
main
6 cards, and then your hand's
targets.
gone.
Yeah.
And you're like, you can read me you can read these 4 cards that I just drew, and then they're gonna go away, and then you can read the next 5 cards that I draw, and then they're
Right.
gonna go away. Like
Yeah.
your readings are not very good against that line, so I don't
You're
generally worry
never gonna
about
be
reading.
holding a normal.
Yeah, not for very long.
Yeah.
And so I don't tend to worry about reading. I do tend to worry about parry when it's very very early, as it starts to catch out some of my early stuff and hurt my neutral. Like I
Okay.
think like parry as a neutral tool is my favorite way to use it, and it's also the way that I worry about when I'm playing Tinker.
Right.
It's going, okay, if they parry this stuff out, it's going to be harder for me to win neutral. And if they get to start a boost war and I'm constantly behind every boost war because I'm not, well, the other thing I worry about is I'm not drawing these things, but in that case you can usually bluff your way through them.
Right.
Like you can play normals to get through for a while. You will eventually draw stuff.
Right.
And if you're not, then you change cards like I described before. But
Yep. Definitely.
anyway, so yeah, that's I consider that non-trivial counterplay is like knock stuff out of his hand before it hits the fields to set him back, and cost him that force advantage.
Right.
Save your own surprise stats, whether that's an EX or your own dumb boost if you happen to have a character specific one. But often surprise EXs, things like EX Cross, EX Assault, can catch him out when he thinks he has enough stats. Where you go, actually, you needed one more. Sorry,
Yep. Yep. And you
that's
just spent a lot more resource. Like an EX is a lot of resources to spend on the strike. It's not as much as Tinker just spent.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, if you ever manage to win cleanly a strike that he invested on, then you are like 3 legs up. It's
Yeah.
nonsense.
Yeah. You're doing
Um,
amazing.
Yep. So yes, be perfectly willing to hold your EX focuses for his late game nonsense, and other EX attacks like EX Cross that you don't normally need an attack as safe as EX Cross, but you might into this nonsense.
Sure.
Um, and then yeah, my general pattern for him is rush him down. Like if he does this, okay, you'll lose that strike. Win the next one. Hit
Right.
hard.
Right.
Yeah, like you like playing your slows early game to deal more damage because in late game he's usually going to play slower attacks, then you can play your fasts and just like trade even to slightly down and win overall.
Right.
Um, that
And it
your
it
minds may vary.
it kind of sounds like your opponent needs to do many of these things at once. Like we talked earlier that like tech is not enough to deal with this.
Yeah,
Tech and parry and rush down and EXs might be enough.
That's generally enough.
Okay.
Usually I see that combination minus EXs, and it's a fair fight.
Okay.
If I'm playing against somebody who knows how to stock EXs and knows how to plan from turn one which EXs they actually care about and when they want them, which by the way, that's not as random as it might sound. That's
Oh yeah,
legitimate skill
that's a
is
skill.
knowing how to hold your EXs and which ones you're going to want to have as EXs.
Yeah.
Deciding from turn one or turn zero which EXs you want this game and which ones you're willing to play as singles.
Yeah.
Commit to that early, run that line, and then when you need them, you will have them. That's an opponent who worries me.
Right.
That's somebody who is preemptively knocking out the stuff that I need to take the initiative, and then when they take the initiative, and I think I can reclaim it, they have something in their back pocket that'll take me by surprise.
Right. That makes sense.
Um,
And I mean, what
like
you've described is just a good Exceed player.
yes,
And some of this stuff is Tinker specific, but the idea of parrying and teching your biggest threats and holding EXs to diffuse your strikes is applicable wisdom to almost
yeah,
any character in the game.
that's totally
There's just
standard. Yeah,
there's just
the
some
biggest
extra stuff for
difference.
Tinker.
Yeah, the biggest difference between like standard Exceed, like good Exceed play, and Tinker specific counterplay is for a lot of characters, they start a boost war, you can participate.
Right.
Tinker starts a boost war, you probably lost.
Right.
Like unless you have exactly tech, right? You're going, okay, he started the boost war with this. Well, he's up 2 or 3 boosts.
Yep.
I'm not catching up.
Yep.
Like he has won that boost war.
Yeah, even somebody who has like some boost oriented action compression, like I don't know, like platinum when
Viper
she exceeds or something.
or platinum, yeah, sure.
Yeah, like they might be able to keep up for like a minute.
Yeah, but they're still going to usually be 1 boost behind because
Yeah,
it's like they can get a boost into play and then and like for free, quote unquote. Well, they're still 1 boost down because this is more than 1 boost.
right,
Like
definitely.
this is worth more than 1 boost.
Right.
Right? So it's like the Viper paradigm where if you if you boost light into Viper, she can boost light and strike, and she's like unhappy, but she's still getting to initiate. If you boost this and the opponent is, boost light and strike, they're still massively down. Like
Sure.
they're still down at least 1 boost.
Yeah, they're down before advance to +2 power.
+2 power.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is enormous.
That's a lot.
So yeah, so like with a lot of characters you can participate in boost wars. With Tinker Knight, if he is deciding the terms of the boost war, then you can't.
Yeah.
Like so that's the biggest difference
Okay.
as far as Exceed fundamentals go.
All right. Yeah, that'll make sense. Cool. Anything else you want to cover about Tinker Knight? I definitely have enjoyed what I've heard so far.
Um I can't think of much. Um yeah. There is some rule silliness with his card expanding. If you play in Prince, then you have both a 3 wide card and 3 separate cards depending on how you prefer to store him.
Yep.
And you have to move them all together if you use the 3 separate cards. If you play any character with markers like Polar Knight or Rachel or City and Serena, wait, not City and Serena because she's always in the middle. Anyway, pay attention to which side of the board you start on. It actually matters. These are like my rules disclaimers, I guess. This is not really additional comments. It's like
Sure.
you might actually care which side you started on because you have to reset to your starting position. And if there's Polar Knight ice spikes on the board, you care where that is.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good point. And
Yep.
in a season like season 4, where stuff like that sometimes happens, where there's some
Yep.
strange jank going on occasionally, that's an important consideration.
Yeah, you got Shield Knight, ice spikes, and Burrow. Like
Yep.
there's all kinds of stuff that's
Yep.
going to be on the board.
Oh, and those don't move when you reset.
Yes, he does not reset those. He resets
Gotcha.
you and the opposing player, which means that like he might land himself onto 3 ice spikes.
Right.
Like yeah, so you gotta be aware of that. There's not really any counterplay to that. If the opponent is putting a bad marker at your starting position and you can't do anything about it, then you can't do anything about it.
Yep.
You'll end up on it. My preferred solution is just don't exceed, right?
Yeah. Simply be a one card wide character instead of a 3 character wide card wide character.
Yeah, then it's not an issue.
Yeah. Right. Well, if that's it, then
I think that's it.
As if that was not enough. D, as always, thank you so much for putting up with my badgering you to teach me a character.
Oh,
I always
absolutely.
really enjoy
My
it.
pleasure. Thanks for letting me ramble about Tinker. I love this guy.
Absolutely. I'm starting to like him too. And to the viewing audience, thank you for putting up with internet issues and power outages and D and I.
Yes, I'm so sorry.
We apologize for ourselves and for our tech related issues. I'm gonna, I think, end this cursed recording before we have a chance to have anything else go wrong.